those who aren't necessarily just governments. Space travel for so long has just been the realm of governments who would have the budgets to do these kinds of things, and we've seen basically an explosion of commercial activity in low Earth orbit. The International Space Station's been kind of the cornerstone of enabling that entire market with a marketplace and a capability for research and transportation and a number of other things. And we work with a lot of partners in the space industry to try and just grow that even more.
Yeah. Another question comes to us from Twitter using the hashtag
an explosion of commercial activity in low Earth orbit. The International Space Station has been kind of the cornerstone of enabling that entire market.
The ISS, the International Space Station, is completely airtight. Given the fact that it is orbiting Earth in the vacuum of space, it has to be airtight in order to make sure that the crew is safe throughout their stay on station.
Yeah, it is essentially airtight. There is enough that you will get a tiny little bit of leak sometimes through seals. So it's never anything where you'll be sucked up against the side of a hatch or anything like that. But just because making something perfectly vacuum-proof is extremely hard, especially when you have so many interconnecting parts. That's why we do occasionally have to inject additional breathing gases into the space station atmosphere. We actually deliver them in these super densified spheres called NORS tanks, nitrogen and oxygen regeneration system, just to kind of top off the atmosphere inside of the International Space Station. But great question. Well, let's do one more from Andrea. Why are spacecraft usually painted white?
That is a good question. So generally speaking, a lot of it comes down to preference. All SpaceX vehicles, our operational vehicles, are black and white. Of course, Starship currently is silver. But as of right, that's still in development. But all of our operational vehicles are black or white. And in this case, it just so happens that in order to conform to that aesthetic, the paint that we use, the thermal protective paint, on top of those panels on the exterior of the capsule, we make it white.
And a lot of other things are white exactly for the reason Kate just said, is those thermal properties. When you're in outer space, the only way you can really heat up or absorb heat or reject heat is through radiation. And if you are a black surface, it's just like down here on planet Earth. If you wear a black shirt and you feel hotter, that's because your shirt is basically absorbing more of that infrared radiation. So to help keep things cooler, essentially, you can paint them white with these reflective or very low albedo coatings, and that can help maintain a better thermal. We have a lot of things we call thermal blankets, which are just essentially white fabrics that will cover up metallic areas of the space station that would otherwise get really hot in direct sunlight, that you can keep cool just with that white color. Great question, though.
Again, we are taking your questions through the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter, so be sure to continue to submit those. We'll try to get to as many as we can throughout the morning.
And for now, we're just going to continue to watch Bob and Doug as they zip around planet Earth. We are a little less than 3 hours away now from things really starting to pick up. We're going to be looking for all of those events that we talked through, starting with that trunk separation coming up soon, and everything's still on track for a splashdown today at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. So stay tuned.
Dragon SpaceX for 4.700.
Go ahead, SpaceX.
Okay, Doug, we're just a couple minutes into the planned suit donning time. I wanted to give you guys a go for all sections of 4.700 deorbit preparation. We are standing by to support suit don.
Okay, copy that. We are through section 3, and we'll report the status of the inventory here in a few minutes, and copy go for suit donning. And just as a status for that, we are in our comfort garments and our orthostatic garments, and we have started the fluid loading protocol.
Okay, SpaceX copies. We'll listen up for that inventory in a few minutes, and you got your comfort garments, orthostatic garments, and have started fluid loading. Thank you for the update.
All right, so we just heard a call up to the crew as they're getting into some of their activities to get ready for this deorbit burn. So they're about to get suited up. We heard they're in their comfort garments, so those are essentially the black athletic clothes that they're going to wear as the base layer underneath their suits. They're also in what they called orthostatic garments, and those are essentially compression pants or compression shorts that they're wearing, and that helps to kind of squeeze that helps to kind of increase the blood flow as they're going to be going from all of the fluids and they're being up around their head to being back in a gravity situation where your blood, everything kind of pools around your legs just due to the pull of gravity. These garments kind of squeeze the legs and force some of that blood back up, so it's not as kind of a jarring of a transition from the fluid shift happening. So they're doing that to prepare for their readaptation to gravity, also doing fluid loading, which has been just shown to help with orthostatic intolerance. So essentially they won't feel as dizzy or disoriented once they get back down. It helps by actually increasing the amount of plasma in the blood even for once they re-enter gravity. So all that going on board right now on Dragon.
Yeah, so it's exciting to hear that they are beginning to enter the last phases that they as crew members need to complete prior to re-entry. We're about 2 hours and 20 minutes away from the next physical milestone in terms of the vehicle itself. We'll have what's known as claw separation, and that's where the mechanism that basically contains the umbilicals for power and telemetry and fluids between the trunk and the capsule, we will separate that in order to allow us to jettison the trunk. By doing so, the heat shield of the capsule will be exposed and allowing Dragon to be ready for re-entry. A couple minutes after we jettison the trunk away from the capsule, we will then maneuver the capsule into a position to allow for it to perform the deorbit burn. This will be the burn that places Dragon on its final trajectory. We are aiming for the Gulf of Mexico today, specifically off the coast of Pensacola, Florida, is our designated landing zone. After the deorbit burn completes, which we're expecting that to be about 11 and a half minutes, we will then close the nose cone and lock it. And then a couple minutes after that completes, we'll begin to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and things will start to get pretty hot.
Yeah, and everything is going to be standing by in the recovery zone once they're done with that deorbit burn, that re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere, and eventually landing under parachutes. This is a live view from the Go Navigator, which is still making its way out to the recovery zone. It left port just a few hours ago, just about 2 hours and 10 minutes ago. Making its way out from Pensacola to the anticipated splashdown zone. It's going to be on station about 3 nautical miles away from the anticipated splashdown site, at which point it'll take it just around 30 minutes to close in on the capsule following the splashdown. As we did discuss earlier, that was pretty much the only issue that had come up so far today, was with a backup generator on the Go Navigator. They were not able to get a replacement one on board in time, but all the flight rules still enable us to go through with this operation. Go Navigator with its primary generator still fully capable of effecting a recovery this morning.
Yeah, so that recovery time, we're looking at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. So if you want to take a nap, you have a couple of hours before the action really kicks in. But we will continue to be bringing you coverage throughout the entire mission. Hopefully we'll have some more great views from Go Navigator, our recovery ship, making its way to the splashdown location. Like we said before, the recovery vessel is currently carrying about 40 people. They all have, it's actually a combination of SpaceX and NASA people. They all have specific jobs, and whenever we are actually performing the recovery operations, you only see a small handful of those individuals on board, because safety is the top priority, not only for Bob and Doug, but also for the personnel on board. So we'll make sure that unnecessary personnel will be away and in one of the back rooms, whereas the operational deck during active recovery mission or during active recovery operations will have those key personnel involved. And we will be able to see the descent all the way through splashdown, as well as the fast boat approach. So those are the two smaller boats that make their way to Dragon after it splashes down. They're the ones that are doing the initial preparation of the capsule, preparing it to be lifted out of the water and onto the recovery vessel. So we have quite a bit coming up, and we're looking forward to being able to show you all of that. As I've mentioned before, the recovery team is a newer one here at SpaceX, since the whole crew recovery process is newer, and it's really cool that we get to showcase them a little bit. The last time we were able to do so was about a year ago, year and a half almost, and on the Demo 1 mission. So be sure to stay tuned throughout the entire recovery process, because once the capsule is lifted up and out of the water and is secured to the deck of the ship, that will be our first opportunity to hopefully get a couple thumbs up from Bob and Doug, indicating that they're feeling good after their return.
Yeah, we expect it to take about an hour from splashdown to them getting out of the capsule. A lot of it will be those initial checks happening in the opening minutes following splashdown, and it'll take about 30 minutes for the primary vessel, the Go Navigator, to get very close to the Dragon capsule itself. And then once it's there, it'll take only a few more minutes to lift it up onto the boat and then move it on that nest towards the crew recovery platform. So it's a platform with enough space for just a couple of people underneath the helipad on board the Go Navigator, where they'll be able to open up the hatch. SpaceX's Anil Menon, one of the flight surgeons that works here, is going to be the first one through the hatch. He'll do a quick check on Bob and Doug, making sure they're ready to come out, and then we'll be assisting them out of the capsule and immediately over into a medical facility on board. They'll be on there for just a little while, and then we'll look to land a helicopter on board the ship, and then they'll catch a quick flight back to Pensacola.
Yeah, so after that, they'll also then be transplanted by airplane back to Houston after they complete those checkouts at the Pensacola Naval Air Station. And then the best part of the day, family reunions. So I'm sure Bob and Doug are looking forward to being able to give their family hugs again in less than 24 hours. If you were tuned in earlier in the webcast, you may have caught the special wake-up message sent to Bob and Doug to bring them out of their sleep phase. It was nothing short of precious and adorable, a message from both of their sons. They each have one son, and it was a nice little audio recording saying, "Daddy, wake up, wake up, wake up." So highly encourage you to check it out, because it is certainly heartwarming and quite a special opportunity to be able to share a moment like that with their family from far away.
And they were pretty adamant. It's a good thing we have weather, because it sounds like those kids are expecting their dads home today. I think one of them's got to go get a dog. so he's excited.
That's what it sounds like.
But everything's gone extremely smoothly with Dragon's flight. It all started yesterday on Saturday when they loaded in and departed the International Space Station. Since then, we've had a series of steps, all executed flawlessly. We haven't had any issues tracked with Dragon during the departure and the setup for splashdown. Again, today, this is our prime location. This is our prime opportunity. So once we undock from station, Dragon had an identified prime and a backup, the alternate, which was several days later. If we were unable to land today, we would target a different site 48 hours later. It's actually about 47 hours from the initial splashdown target to the secondary. And that secondary was locked in a few hours ago as Panama City. But everything's looking great with the weather today. As we talked through, we had constraints of about 10 miles an hour for the wind. And our initial weather report last night, we were about a mile an hour, and we just got upgraded to about 2 miles an hour.
That is correct.
Winds have doubled, but when you go from 1 to 2 miles an hour, we're still well within the limits. So still looking forward to an on-time and a good splashdown today.
Yeah, the other good news coming out of that most recent weather report is that the waves are also looking really calm. The threshold for the waves is based on how high the wave is going to get and how frequently. So waves occur in this type of pattern, and for safety reasons, we can't have high waves or waves at a certain height occurring very frequently. That makes recovery operations dangerous. And we're pleased to report that the last information that we got regarding the weather anticipated at splashdown are very small waves. I pulled up here real quick. It was something like, here we go. Just half a foot occurring every 6 seconds. So you can basically think of it as if your ocean baseline is here, every 6 seconds if your ocean baseline is here, every 6 seconds, your wave comes up a half a foot every 6 seconds. So really calm. So we're really happy to see that while unfortunately the weather in the Atlantic Ocean landing zones wasn't really cooperating, we're very happy to report that the anticipated weather for splashdown today is going to be mild, and based on the views that we were seeing from Go Navigator earlier, quite the picture-perfect day.
And weather is something that we track very closely. If you've been following the mission since May, weather was definitely in the conversation back when we launched, where we had to scrub the first attempt just due to some bad weather that moved into the area. But we're able to just kind of pinpoint right between some clouds for that second launch attempt on May 30th. And then we were watching it extremely closely today, too, or even in the lead up to where we are today. And we're going to continue to have weather checkpoints all the way up until about an hour and a half before landing. That's really the final opportunity we have to wave off. And we actually have a question from Twitter. Just a reminder, use the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter, and we'll try to get to your question throughout the morning. And this one from Demi wanted to know, if the splashdown were to be scrubbed, could Dragon go back to ISS, or could they be in the orbit on their own? For this mission, we don't have a plan essentially to re-rendezvous with the International Space Station. We weren't going to undock until we had good weather at a prime and alternate location. Both were go at the time that we left. So if for some reason we had to wave off within the next hour or so from Pensacola, Dragon would continue in its orbit. It would make some adjustments over the next 47 hours, and then we would target a splashdown at Panama City. We had to lock in that alternate site just a few hours ago. Up until that point, for the first about 12 hours or so, Dragon has the ability to change alternate sites, so we could have targeted one of the other Gulf sites, potentially even going back to Pensacola on the second 2 days later, but we were able to lock in Panama City. And not anticipating to need that, but Dragon does have the ability to wave off and kind of reattempt a splashdown 2 days later.
Yeah, as we mentioned earlier, Dragon will be performing a deorbit burn. That'll last 11 and a half minutes. That deorbit burn is the moment where we are sending Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing zone. That deorbit burn maneuvering is performed a little bit less than an hour prior to splashdown itself. So like Dan said, definitely continuing to monitor weather until the very last moment that we can, but there is a little bit of flexibility there in terms of if we have to wave off for 24 or 48 hours, Bob and Doug would remain in the capsule.
All right, our next question comes from Cody Bone O'Brien, who wanted to know what were Bob and Doug doing in space. Well, they spent 62 days on board the International Space Station as crew members of Expedition 63, and they were fully fledged crew members, so they kind of did the full gamut of space station operations. They did everything from executing science, contributing more than 100 hours of their time to executing science experiments on board from pretty much every discipline we have on there, from biology to technology demonstrations, to just learning more about the human body and how it adapts to space flight. Bob Behnken was part of 4 spacewalks along with Chris Cassidy. The two of them both now have 10 spacewalks in their careers, ties them with Mike Lopez Alegria and Peggy Whitson as the most for U.S. astronauts. So they were extremely busy while they were on the space station. I know Chris Cassidy was happy to have some help on board, as it's just been him and his 2 Russian cosmonauts for the last several months, and they're kind of back in that situation now, and that's why we're really looking forward to Crew 1 coming up this fall.
Yeah, days on the International Space Station, in addition to spacewalks and performing science experiments, you also have to eat, you have to sleep, and you have to exercise. So it's really easy to see how whenever there are only a couple of people on the International Space Station, that things that are, exercise, eating, and sleeping are absolutely essential. Exercise helps to keep the body strong and try to prevent the effects of that microgravity has on the human body. So when it comes to what might get shifted out a little bit, it's not exercise, it's not eating, it's not sleeping, and so having 2 extra hands on board to assist with things like spacewalks and being able to perform some of the science on board was definitely a help. But in addition to that, Bob and Doug were also completing mission objectives related to Demo 2 while it was docked, making sure that the battery life was as expected, making sure that the solar panels were still absorbing and generating power as expected. So I am sure that by the time that they get home, they will be pretty tired, not just from the dynamic events happening today, but just from the last 2 months as a whole. I'm getting tired just thinking about it.
Ready for a break, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, our next question comes from Philip Hartman, who wants to know how much training does it take to be able to operate, control all of the technology on Dragon and the things on Space Station? I can touch on the space station stuff. We typically train crew members for about 2 years. We've had a couple that kind of cram in that training a little bit shorter than that, but typically crew members get assigned about 2 years out and spend that entire time training just to do day-to-day tasks on board the space station. I mean, that's everything from just operating the basic facilities, learning how to repair all of the major pieces of hardware, like the thing that generates your oxygen or scrubs the carbon dioxide, how the water recycling system works. They get kind of crash courses in operating a bunch of different science hardware that's on board the space station. You kind of have to become a jack of all trades when you're up there, because one day you're a mechanic, the next day you're a physicist, the next day you're spacewalking, and so they get a whole bunch of training that they have to take, and it's done all over the world too.
Yeah, definitely can't call a handyman when something goes wrong.
Yeah.
You are the handyman. The next question comes to us from Abby. Again, this is the hashtag AskNASA on Twitter. This may be a silly question, but is there a telescope on the ISS that the crew can use?
They don't have a telescope. They don't actually have very many windows that look up at the stars. We have a number of science experiments that are on the International Space Station that use its position outside of the Earth's atmosphere to look kind of beyond our solar system. We have some that aren't necessarily telescopes, but like the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, which is looking for signs of dark matter. And then we have one that was a Japanese payload. The name is escaping me, but it was essentially looking for pulsars throughout the universe, and was really cool. It was essentially developing a futuristic version of GPS, where it was looking to develop a system or a map where you could use pulsars, some of the brightest objects in the universe, to navigate. And obviously that's not something we need to worry about right now because we're not leaving our solar system anytime soon. But we're already learning how to do that, and we're using the International Space Station to do it. They have some big lenses for their cameras, but those are pretty much pointed back down towards Earth. Our next question wanted to know, how does the communication to Dragon work? Is it done through satellites?
Partially, yes. If you think about the International Space Station orbiting Earth, it technically is considered a satellite as well as a spaceship.
Really big one.
Yeah. And then we also have ground stations across the world that are able to provide uplinks and downlinks from the station, as well as from Dragon capsule itself. So we try to make all of those connections as direct as possible to us here in Mission Control, for trying to reduce latency and making sure that we get high quality feeds. So we try to avoid ping-ponging as much as possible. But yeah, there are a number of ways, but generally speaking, we go from capsule to ground in as short of a distance as possible.
All right, our next one comes from Juliet, who wants to know, does NASA have a full-size mock-up of the space station in a training facility? We have several, actually. We have a building called the Space Vehicle Mock-up Facility at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, where we have a full-size mock-up of every single habitable module. So that's essentially saying every single module you can actually go inside. There's a huge part of the space station itself that's just external, that isn't pressurized, and the astronauts only really see when they're spacewalking. So to familiarize them with that part, we have a full-size mock-up in the bottom of our swimming pool, the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory, a 40-foot deep pool where they practice how to spacewalk. So we have several, and they're typically of kind of different fidelity is what we call them. So you'll have some that have real racks, real science hardware, real oxygen generation system built in, and then you'll have some that are just kind of representative of them. They'll be full-size, but they might have like a printed poster of what's on the wall here. But you can still use things like that for emergency training. We really try to do as much training on the ground, and I know we do the same in Dragon, in something that's lifelike for what they're about to be flying on once they're in space. So by the time that they get there, a lot of your actions just feel like reflex.
So at this point, we're going to check in on Dragon. Looks like it is about to go over Eastern Europe. We're going to show our ground track here and allow you to follow along. We still have, let me check my timer here. We still have 2 hours and 1 minute until our major milestone begins. That will be the claw separation and preparation to jettison the trunk. Again, that's coming up in 2 hours and 1 minute at 10:51 a.m. Pacific or 18:51 Universal. So stay with us and enjoy watching Dragon traverse the Earth.
SpaceX Dragon for inventory after fluid loading.
Okay, SpaceX is ready to copy fluid inventory after fluid loading.
Okay, from location 10, 2 additional bottles were consumed from bag 207 and 1 from bag 206. So that leaves 208 empty, 207 empty, and 206 with 2 remaining. From location 9, 3 bottles were consumed from 203. So that leaves 203 and 204 as empties. Everything else is per the packing plan.
Okay, thanks for the update. Looks like bag 207 consumed 2 bottles, 206 consumed 1 bottle, 208, 207 are empty, and 206 has 2 remaining. And then from location 9, we copy 2 bottles from 203, I believe, and that means 203 and 204 empty, the rest per packing plan.
From location 9, 203 and 204 are empty, and everything else is per the packing plan.
Okay, copy location 9 correction, 203 and 204 empty, the rest in location 9 per the packing plan.
Good, we're back.
And just one more sanity check, Bob. Could you just tell us the total number of bottles consumed?
Let me try to do the math from my notes here. I believe since departing station, we've consumed 13 bottles.
Okay, copy. 13 bottles. We'll reconcile our records down here and let you know if we got any questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Solo. And we're about to close out locations 9 and 10 and be suited, and so it's not going to be practical to go back and re-inventory anything if there's any questions after about 3 minutes. So please let us know if you can early.
Okay, copy. And actually, we do have a question for location 10, bag 206. Can you please read back the quantity there remaining?
Okay, let me unstow that bag. It looks like I made a mistake. I thought they had 3 bottles in each one, and I just reported 1 was removed. I'll have to unstow the bag to count the quantity inside of 206.
We have a pretty good readout, Bob, that 206 started at 5 bottles. So if you know you took 2 out of there, we can call that one 3.
No, from 206, we took a single bottle out. So let me count them for you.
Okay, thanks for that double check.
And in location 206, there are 4 bottles remaining.
Okay, 4 bottles remaining in 206. That math makes better sense to us. Appreciate it.
All right, well, we are still just getting closer and closer to things really picking up as Bob and Doug get ready to hit the final phase of their flight back to Earth and the end of this Demo 2 mission. Still have a couple of milestones to go, but I mean, everything picked up when we departed the space station yesterday, and it's been a pretty smooth ride so far. So everything really kicked off back on Saturday as on their 62nd day on board the International Space Station and their 63rd day in space, Bob and Doug began to get the capsule ready for their ride home. Everything picked up when they got all of the final cargo into the Dragon capsule and then got themselves in and then closed that hatch, crawling in through the top hatch to the Dragon spacecraft, getting suited up shortly thereafter. Meanwhile, on the station side, Station Commander Chris Cassidy closed the A-Pass hatch, creating what is known as the vestibule, a space between the two hatches that would be exposed to vacuum following undocking. Then we use valves on the Dragon side to draw the air out of that vestibule in a depressurization step, bringing it down to vacuum and getting it ready for that eventual physical separation or undocking. After that was complete, the teams down here on the ground, both in MCCX right behind us in Hawthorne and in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, did a go-no-go for undocking, making sure everything was good with systems on board Dragon and the health of the International Space Station. Following that go-no-go, we had a successful separation with Dragon using Draco thrusters around its service section to physically separate from the International Space Station. After hooks had driven back that were holding it in place, it executed those 2 quick burns. Then it was on to 4 departure burns spread over a number of hours, initially taking Dragon up and over the International Space Station, which brought it behind, and then after it lowered its orbit beneath the station, eventually bringing it out in front. Following all of those successful departure burns, it was just about time for the crew to get some sleep. And actually, during their sleep period, we were able to do what's known as the departure phasing burn. It's a little off in this timeline as it actually switched in the final hours leading up, but that departure...
Dragon SpaceX, we have you loud and clear for suited comm check.
I read you the same.
Just pausing that timeline as the crew in their suit up steps, they just did a comm check. So they have communications run through the umbilical in their seats directly into their suits where they're able to maintain that conversation with the ground. We heard a little bit of chatters a few minutes ago as they were finishing up that fluid loading. Again, that's done to help with combating orthostatic intolerance. And to put it simply, that's dizziness in most people. Fluid loading can actually help your body react to what's typically a rush of blood away from the head once you get back down in a gravity environment, which can make you extremely dizzy. So fluid loading, you can actually up the amount of plasma in your blood, and that just helps kind of minimize that. They're also wearing what's known as an orthostatic garment, essentially compression pants that's squeezing their legs and forcing some of that fluid from the legs up towards the upper part of their body. So everything's continuing to proceed. They're suited up inside Dragon for the second time in the last 24 hours as we get ready for this deorbit.
Yeah, there on your screen, you can see a shot of our Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Those folks there are our Dragon operators, our technical experts that continue to monitor the data and telemetry coming down from Dragon, not only about the vehicle, but of the crew themselves, continuing to make sure that everything is going well and just making sure that we are green or go to step into the next major milestones that we have coming up. At this point, we're about an hour and a half away from that. Those milestones will begin with the claw separation, which is when we initiate the jettison of the trunk. In order to expose the heat shield underneath the capsule, we need to let the trunk go away. So we separate the two. That trunk will actually re-enter the Earth's the trunk will actually re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, and it'll disintegrate upon doing so. Oh, we got our nice little animation back here, so I'll toss it back over to Dan.
Yeah, we did that departure phasing burn. That's what really kind of set us up on our pathway towards where we are today. And then the crew did have a sleep period. This is about a 19-hour phasing or a 19-hour trip from the station to the splashdown. And then as Kate was saying, we're almost up to claw and trunk separation.
Yeah, so at 10:51 a.m. Pacific or 18:51 United time or Universal time, we will have that claw and trunk separation, which, like I said before, will basically allow us to expose the heat shield and prepare us to execute the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is intended to place Dragon on its final trajectory to its landing zone, which, as we have mentioned before, it's determined to be off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. The deorbit burn will last about 11 and a half minutes. After doing so, we will close and lock the nose cone. We do this in order to protect the forward hatch located there at the top of the capsule. And we do that after the deorbit burn because the thrusters located there in the forward bulkhead are what we use to actually perform the deorbit burn. So once that nose cone is closed, we enter a 6-minute-long communication blackout. This is because we are re-entering the atmosphere. As we encounter that atmosphere and friction builds up, plasma builds up on the external sides of the capsule, creating a barrier, essentially, where we can't command the capsule or receive telemetry. However, Dragon is completely autonomous, so totally fine. It's driving itself at that point anyway. So we will then, like I said, that blackout period lasts for 6 minutes. A couple minutes after that, we will deploy the drogue parachutes. Drogue parachutes are used for a couple of reasons. One, to help slow the vehicle down further before we deploy the main parachutes, as well as to stabilize the vehicle. About a minute after the drogue parachute deployment, we will deploy the 4 main parachutes. If you watched our Demo 1 splashdown, those are big, beautiful orange and white parachutes, and those further decelerate the vehicle down to a mere 15 or 16 miles per hour. That's the speed that they'll be going when they splash down in the Gulf of Mexico. Again, we're targeting just off the east coast of Florida near Pensacola. Once splashdown is confirmed and we cut the main parachutes away so they don't pull the capsule, recovery operations begin immediately. So that entails essentially getting the capsule out of the water and lifting it onto the recovery vessel. And once that is all secure, we open the hatch and we get our first glimpse of Bob and Doug back here on planet Earth for the first time since they launched on Falcon 9 back in late May. So that particular moment will be the first time they get to breathe fresh air, and we're looking forward to getting some thumbs up from them whenever we see them exit the capsule.
And everything's lining up for an on-time splashdown and recovery. We've been following the progress of Go Navigator as it makes its way out to the recovery zone. It left its port in Pensacola just a few hours ago, and we're tracking that it should be arriving on station just about at the top of this current hour. So it'll be there in advance of all of the upcoming hardware milestones where we get into trunk step and everything like that. So it'll be there and ready with the operational teams, a little over 40 personnel on board from SpaceX and NASA ready to assist in the recovery of the capsule and getting Bob and Doug home.
Yeah. So as those mission controllers there in our mission control center here, just to my left, continue to monitor Dragon's health, we continue to monitor Twitter for your questions. We're using the hashtag AskNASA, and we're trying to get through to as many questions as possible this morning. Our next question comes to us from Jackie. The question is, what is the name of the Dragon recovery vessel that's sailing to the splashdown location? Great question, especially because we actually have 2. The one that we are utilizing today is Go Navigator. This recovery ship is for all of our of all of the splashdown locations on the west coast of Florida. So any potential splashdown location in the Gulf of Mexico is serviced by Go Navigator. For our East Coast landing sites, which we will not be attempting today, we use Go Searcher. Both the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher are identical. They have a fully functional recovery platform as well as medical bays. So it's really nice that we're able to assist the departure process. So departing the International Space Station, it's really great that we're able to assist that departure process by allowing for more opportunities for departure by having more landing sites. So today we are using Go Navigator, and it departed for the landing zone about 2.5 hours ago, I think, at this point. And it is en route to the designated landing zone just off the coast of Pensacola.
All right, and our next question comes from Takur, who wanted to know, what's the importance of inventory check during the splashdown? If you were just listening a few minutes ago, you heard Bob and Doug going through a wide range of inventory checks, and a lot of it was their food and water, particularly the water, as they had just completed that fluid loading. As we've talked about a few times today, we have to meticulously track every single item on a spacecraft for the obvious reasons, like if an astronaut needs to find it, it helps to know where it is. And then for some of the less obvious reasons, like we have to track where everything is, and if something is missing in a spacecraft, you have to kind of halt work once it's back on the ground and make sure you find it. And then also for things like food and water, that's something we call a consumable. So those are essentially resources that you have a finite amount of. Food, water, obviously one of those. They have about 3 days worth of food and plenty of water on board. It wasn't the limiting consumable for this flight home, as was discussed in our pre-return news conference. Carbon dioxide scrubbing was kind of the low man on the totem pole for the trip home. They have just about 3 days worth. So you have to think of all of these different items that are life support systems typically that fall into that consumable port whenever you're kind of mapping just how much on-orbit lifetime that you have. So we knew that we were going to either return today or within 47 hours after that, and so we make sure we have plenty for that situation, and then hours beyond that as just extra margin, as we're always about redundancy and backup plans and everything like that.
Something else to consider with respect to the importance of inventory, during the reentry period, we don't want anything loose flying around. That is certainly hazardous to the crew. And so taking inventory of what has been unstowed and then restowed allows us to be absolutely sure that something didn't accidentally, because, you know, as you're floating there, it is easy to let go of something and then it might drift off to behind the control panel. Like Dan said before, it's very easy for things to kind of drift off on the International Space Station and get lost. So really having this inventory allows us to make sure that there aren't any foreign objects that aren't supposed to be out during the times in which they are meant to be stowed. So inventory is important for a number of reasons. Our next question comes to us from Tim. He says, my 10-year-old daughter, Haley, wants to know how hot the exterior of the spacecraft will get during re-entry. Awesome. Well, good morning, Haley, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for tuning into our webcast. We're really pleased to have young viewers joining us for this historic mission. So a really good question. The outside of Dragon capsule will reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. That is very hot, but Bob and Doug will be safe and comfortable inside of the Dragon capsule. We have measures in place to make sure that the inside of the capsule will be flushed with cold air, as well as the air inside of their spacesuits. So even though the outside will be getting really hot, Bob and Doug will barely be breaking a sweat.
All right, our next question comes from Mohan, who wants to know, will the Super Draco thrusters be a backup to the parachutes? That's a good question, because one of the earliest designs of Dragon had it doing what's called a propulsive landing, so kind of like how the Falcon 9 comes back. An early design of this Crew Dragon had it landing propulsively, so using those Super Dracos to touch down on like a runway. That's no longer in Dragon's configuration. In fact, those Super Draco thrusters are completely inhibited following a successful flight into orbit. They're only used for an emergency escape situation, either on the pad or during the initial climb up to orbit. They enable Dragon to do that escape from the pad all the way up, so you have kind of that extra safety net your entire way uphill. But once they're on orbit and they're making their way to the space station, or even when we're coming home, those thrusters are disabled. We're only using the smaller Draco thrusters around the service section, so the bottom of the capsule itself, and the four at the very top, the forward bulkhead thrusters. Our next question from Amy wants to know what happens to the parachutes after splashdown. Are they recovered?
Yeah, absolutely. So there will be, after splashdown, there will be 2 fast boats or smaller boats that will be approaching the Dragon capsule. The first boat is responsible for determining that there aren't any toxic vapors surrounding the capsule. That fast boat will then also be responsible for preparing the capsule for lift out of the water. The second boat is responsible for retrieving the parachutes out of the water. We definitely don't want to leave any waste behind where possible, and so that second boat is responsible for going and retrieving the parachutes. After splashdown, those parachutes are automatically cut so that there's no potential that if there was a little bit of wind, that the Dragon capsule wouldn't be moved due to wind catching in those parachutes. So great question, but short answer is yeah, they're cut. They're automatically cut after splashdown, and then one of the crews from the fast boats is responsible for going to pick them up. The next question we have coming from #AskNASA on Twitter comes to us from Novacon. What will be the purpose of the crew for the Crew 1 mission?
The Crew 1 mission will be what we call the first operational flight of the Dragon spacecraft. So the mission we're still on right now is a demonstration. This is still a test mission. This is when we're really proving out Dragon's capabilities from launch all the way through splashdown. After this test, if everything goes well and we're lined up great for a splashdown today, we'll sit down and we'll go through a certification process for SpaceX to fly operational missions. This means they'll be flying regular expedition long-duration flights. So the Crew 1 will be the first 4-person crew to launch in a Dragon spacecraft and then spend 6 months on board the International Space Station. So we'll have 4 individuals, Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, Shanna Walker, and Soichi Noguchi from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, launching in Dragon and then spending 6 months on board the space station doing science experiments, conducting spacewalks, repairs, everything that a normal expedition crew does. They'll just be arriving and leaving in a Dragon.
Yeah, I think Commander Chris Cassidy will still be on board with our targeted, given the current targeted Crew 1 launch.
SpaceX Dragon comm check from the PLT.
We've got you 5x5, Bob.
And I'm to SpaceX and check between us.
And please repeat the last 5 seconds of that call. We had a bit of a comm dropout.
He's out of clear as well. We have being Doug and I.
And Dragon, we copy that you heard us loud and clear. Unfortunately, the rest of the message was garbled. Please repeat one more time.
Yeah, we've got a good comm check between both of us, and we are complete with suit downing 4.010. How copy?
Okay, that was 5x5. We copy that you are complete with suit donning procedure.
Okay, it sounds like the crew now suited up. They just conducted those communications checks, those comm checks with the core here in Hawthorne. The core of the crew operations responsible engineer, that's essentially the person who's talking directly to Bob and Doug throughout their flight. That's rotated through a couple of different positions as we're on the 3rd shift of their flight home. And that'll be pretty much the person who's getting all of the updates to and from Bob and Doug, being that liaison between the teams on the ground. But they did those comm checks successfully. They are in their suits. They're going to stay in their suits and in their seats for the rest of the day, pretty much, from that deorbit burn.
SpaceX looking for an update on sections 1 through 4 of 4.700 deorbit preparation when able.
And SpaceX Dragon, we are complete with sections 1 through 4. And looking at section 5, the only thing left there to do is 5 alpha decimal 2. As far as the suit leak check, I think everything else is complete.
Okay, copy. Sections 1 through 4 are complete, and it sounds like we have. Sounds like you're completing fluid loading and standing by for the leak check.
That's a good copy, Mike.
Thanks, Doug. Appreciate it.
So what we heard there was communication between Dragon and...
And Mike, I just wanted to check back with you on the comm dropout that you had on the last 2 calls that I made to you. How is this comm now? Was it explainable as just random dropouts, or is it continuing from the PLTC?
Okay, Bob, we had you 5 by 5 just then, much better than before. We're investigating root cause, but given the clarity of your call just now, I would suspect your audio system is healthy.
Copy, thank you.
Okay, so there we heard a little bit of communication, just confirming that we were that Mission Control was able to read or hear, as it's referred to, Bob and Doug clearly as they have put on their suits. We also heard the go for leak check. So now that the suits are on, we will be performing a quick leak check. We do this every time the suits are put on or donned, as you heard it called. Basically, this is where we pressurize the suits. It's the only time that we pressurize them throughout the mission. And it's essentially to make sure that, all the zippers are in the right, are zipped up properly. All it takes is, one small unzipped piece to not hold the pressure. So we make sure that everything is fitted up accordingly and that it's ready to go in case of a need to pressurize the suits later in the mission. Unlikely, but it's nice to know, just for that, for testing purposes, to know that that capability is there. That's what they're designed for. So that leak check will commence, and after we get that, we'll pressurize the suits themselves, and then they will depressurize. Bob and Doug will be able to lift the visor on their helmet again, and then that's essentially, that's what they will be wearing during this last phase of their mission as they re-enter the Earth's atmosphere. So a lot of good stuff there. Again, nope. No call there.
Fake out.
Like we said before, we're taking your questions through Twitter this morning using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from Robert. Is the U.S. Navy supporting recovery with ships and aircraft?
They are not. I suspect that question comes from the last time we did splashdowns with U.S. spacecraft and astronauts, where we had the Navy assisting throughout the Apollo program for the recoveries. They are not assisting in this. All of the recovery assets for the nominal mission are SpaceX. So SpaceX owns both recovery ships, the Go Navigator and the Go Searcher, and then contract out with the different helicopters and other assets that are used in this recovery. NASA does have a Department of Defense backup, essentially. If Bob and Doug were to have to splash down anywhere other than those 7 sites that we target around Florida, we have the capability to call them up to effect a fast rescue and recovery using parajumpers or whatever assets are available to us. They are also called up on launch days in the event that we were to have an abort on the way to orbit with them coming down somewhere in the Atlantic. But for now, today, everything is SpaceX and NASA.
Another question coming to us from Humzi. Is there a time limit on how long the capsule can be left to float in the Atlantic Ocean before it needs to be recovered? Yeah, so obviously we want to get the crew out as soon as possible, let them get out and stretch their legs and begin their medical evaluations. However, the capsule would be able to float there for a couple of days, like we mentioned before. There is enough onboard water and food. They would be comfortable, although if the waves pick up, I certainly would not be comfortable. That being said, we do strive to recover them as soon as possible. This is part of the reason why we have numerous potential landing zone sites, and we have special criteria for where they actually land to ensure that we're able to get the crew up and out of the water and into the medical bays essentially within an hour after splashdown.
All right, our next one comes from Mark, who wants to know, can they take over from the computer and do a manual splashdown if required? They can. Initiating a deorbit or an emergency deorbit is one of the capabilities available to crew members on board. You would have to be in a pretty extreme situation to do that. Something we're obviously not in today, as everything's gone really smoothly with Dragon, but that is something that's available to them. They also have the capability to manually step in for a number of the different steps during the re-entry, mainly for any parachute deployments or even cutting the parachutes after they've splashed down. If that doesn't happen automatically, they have a button right in front of them on their displays where they can make that happen. So they do have quite a bit of capability to jump in if required.
Yeah, that is one of the few hardwired buttons on their display panel, but it is certainly not one that can be triggered accidentally. It is a two-step verification lever, essentially. So no need to worry about performing an emergency deorbit accidentally. Next question comes to us from NASA plus space equals heart. I couldn't agree more. Will this Crew Dragon be reused? Yes, it will. This particular capsule is intended to be reused on the Crew 2 mission, which will be launching sometime next year. And yeah, we already have plans for reuse for it. In fact, the team at the Cape is already preparing to begin those refurbishment processes as soon as the capsule lands, essentially really getting a head start on that. The capsule is waterproof. That was a process that we learned how to do through the Crew Cargo program. Our reuse efforts with that program, with our previous version of the Dragon capsule, also known as Dragon 1, the process of making that waterproof that knowledge that we learned from that has transferred over to Crew Dragon capsules, and it's safe to say that it is with very little refurbishment required to the internal hardware. There's very little refurbishment required because we're able to keep it watertight and eliminate any exposure to salt water, which for metallic surfaces does cause corrosion, which is no good for spaceflight. So short answer is that, yeah, we will be reusing this as soon as next year on the NASA Crew 2 mission.
All right, our next one from Lisa. What are Bob and Doug bringing back from ISS, if anything? There's quite a bit, actually. They have about 150 kilograms, or a little over 330 pounds of cargo, essentially strapped to the ground right underneath their seats. The lion's share of that is utilization or science samples. A lot of it cold stowage samples that's kept in powered freezers. Those samples coming from a range of biological and biomedical studies, a lot of them with the astronauts themselves as the test subjects. As cargo return, a pretty critical capability as we execute a lot of the science on station, but we need to return a lot of the samples for analysis down in labs here on Earth, and they're going to be bringing a lot of that down. They're also returning some vehicle hardware items that have either malfunctioned or just passed their service life and need to come home or get inspected. And then a couple of their personal items, things like their sleeping bags are coming back with them. And they also have a couple of special items we've touched on a few times, including that tremor dinosaur that was chosen by both of their sons as their zero-G indicator for this mission, and the flag that was left there by Doug Hurley and his fellow crewmates of STS-135, the final space shuttle mission that is coming home. It's been up there for just about 9 years, and it will fly again when we send humans around the moon in the not too distant future. And I know we haven't seen it, but I have heard that Little Earth is also coming back. I almost forgot about that. Little Earth was the zero-G indicator on Demo 1 and remained on station after that mission, and it's pretty sure it was packed away to come home on Demo 2.
I think you're right. So right now, Dragon is currently flying over the far South Pacific Ocean. We have a nice little map here to show you of our ground tracking. So there you can see it on your screen. If you're curious, the yellow indicates where the capsule is in daylight. The red part of the line indicates where it goes into eclipse, or whenever it's basically hiding in Earth's shadow. So right now it's in daylight. Bob and Doug must be getting some pretty spectacular views as they're completing their suit-up process. But at this point, we're going to take a quick break and leave you with our lovely ground map here.
Dragon SpaceX for video.
Go ahead.
Yeah, request to come back aboard when y'all are ready.
We are ready for you to come aboard.
Outstanding, and work. Dragon SpaceX, you are go for procedure 4.011 suit leak check.
Suit leak check can work.
Okay, so we just heard the crew now stepping into suit leak checks. As we've described a few times, this is when they're actually going to pressurize their suits that they wear for launch and entry, and really any of the dynamic phases of the mission. So they'll completely zip up and seal the suits, and then flow nitrox in to confirm.
Dragon in 2.2, we are ready to pressurize.
Dragon SpaceX, you are go to pressurize.
So Bob Bankin and Doug Hurley getting the go. They're going to pressurize their suits. So pressurized nitrox now going to flow in. Again, these suits are, we have confirmation the leak check is in progress. So these suits are worn as just another line of defense to help protect the crew members from the harsh environment of outer space. If they were to experience a cabin depressurization, any kind of poisonous leak in their atmosphere, or even a fire, these suits are designed to protect from all of those different instances. So the suit leak check is pretty standard. Anytime before we get into one of these dynamic operations, we just want one more check to make sure that the suit is ready to go in case it's called upon. And so they'll pressurize now and flow some nitrox, some nitrogen and oxygen through their suits. They'll look for it to maintain a constant pressure. And then once that's done, they'll depressurize the suits, and they'll leave the zipper open. They'll typically leave one zipper just unzipped a little bit when they're not pressurized. They'll still have cool air flowing through. In fact, they'll do what's called a suit purge just before we do the deorbit burn. So at the same time, they flush the cabin atmosphere itself with some cool down air. They'll flow some cooled air through the suits just to help regulate the temperature, the cooling effect inside the capsule, just to make sure the environment stays at a comfortable temperature for them, while the Dragon capsule itself heats up to about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So we got about a minute left in this suit leak check. We'll wait for the results on that, and we'll just be one more box checked on our way to the upcoming trunk step, deorbit burn, re-entry, and splashdown. And one interesting thing to note, if you're watching this ground track, you're going to start to see that line coming out of the bottom left corner and ending in the Gulf. That means we are on our final orbit. And so Dragon's basically on its last lap around planet Earth. The last 90 minutes it's going to spend until we just about get to that splashdown. So you can keep an eye on that. The line's going to stop moving where you can see it terminate in the Gulf.
Dragon SpaceX, we show nominal leak check.
Copy, show the same.
So there a minute ago, we had confirmation of nominal leak check. Again, that's just checking another box off on the to-do list as Bob and Doug continue their return home back to planet Earth. Up next, we will be making sure that the nitrox system is safed and that we are able to proceed into the next phases of our descent to the Gulf of Mexico. We are aiming for a splashdown site just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Right now, our recovery ship is en route to that designated location zone, and it will be there ready and waiting for Bob and Doug to splash down. There on your screen, we do have a live shot from Go Navigator. Again, that's our recovery ship located in the Gulf of Mexico. You can get a little bit of a feel for that wave action that we got there. Generally speaking, pretty calm looking based on the waves that we can see there in the shot. And yeah, so we're excited to be able to welcome Bob and Doug back home. Just checking my timeline quickly. Their landing will be coming up in just under 2 hours. We're looking at an hour and 57 minutes. That will be happening at 11:48 a.m. Pacific time, 18:48 Universal Coordinated Time. Before we get to their water landing, we have to perform a couple of steps prior to that. If you've been following along with us this morning, you're probably very familiar with this. But for perhaps those of you who have joined in within the last few minutes, at this point we are exactly an hour away from the next physical milestone that needs to be completed prior to Dragon Endeavour's return to planet Earth. Those activities will begin with claw separation. The claw is what connects the umbilicals, the power, the telemetry, the fluids between the Dragon capsule and its trunk. In order to expose the heat shield in preparation for Dragon's re-entry through the atmosphere, we need to jettison the trunk. It will disintegrate upon entering the Earth's atmosphere itself. So once we separate that, we're now able to step into what's called slew to deorbit burn attitude. That's essentially maneuvering the capsule into position to perform the deorbit burn. The deorbit burn is where we fire the 4 Draco thrusters that are located at the top of the capsule near the forward hatch. We call those the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. It'll last about 11 and a half minutes. That deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon in its final trajectory to the exact landing location. So like I said, that'll be about 11 and a half minutes long. After that burn completes, we want to close the nose cone and lock it up. Like I said, that's where the forward hatch is located. And since these capsules are designed to be reusable, we definitely want to protect those thrusters and that hatch, because that is the hatch where the astronauts basically exit and enter the capsule when they're going in and out of the International Space Station. So once we have that nose cone locked and in place, we then begin to enter the Earth's atmosphere.
Dragon SpaceX for deorbit burn brief.
Go ahead.
Okay, first off, for timing, showing no changes. Your tablet and onboard times on your timeline are within about 1 minute or less of our ground estimates. How copy?
Copy. Timing on board is per the iPads and within a minute.
And even better, the onboard countdown in your timeline should be within a few seconds. So looking pretty good. For the vehicle, Endeavour is looking great for entry. The ready comm during Bob's comm check earlier we consider temporary, and we are not tracking any system issues. How copy?
Endeavour's in good shape and good comm from the PLT.
Okay, as far as recovery goes, Go Navigator is just about at the recovery in position, so within a few kilometers. In addition, the WB is airborne. Recovery team is go at this time.
Go for recovery. Copy all.
Yep, and one quick go back. Recovery has arrived, so they are on station. In addition, for the weather, I'm looking at the weather right now from the water video from Go Navigator, and it looks like glass. It's awesome. The latest splashdown forecast, though, is winds at 2.25 knots, wave height less than a foot, and a 6-second period. How copy?
Copy. Winds, waves, and weather.
All right, so there we heard the deorbit briefing. This is basically the opportunity that the Corps here.
Okay, Doug, that's all we got for the burn brief. We'll talk to you shortly before deorbit sequence start.
Copy all. Thanks, Mike.
And correction there, we'll have the go, no-go for you shortly. That'll be the next step.
Okay.
Yeah, so as I was saying, the burn briefing there, just making sure that everyone's on the same page. Since Bob and Doug's primary role during re-entry is to monitor telemetry, timing, and data, it is important to make sure that their onboard timers, or basically time listings, are synced with the most recent trajectory simulations that we've generated here in Mission Control. So that's what that was, just making sure that their sequence of events was lining up with with what we're seeing down here in Mission Control. So all really good stuff there. We also heard that the recovery vessel Go Navigator is in position, so it is ready and waiting for splashdown, which, like I said before, will be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal, and we're just under 2 hours from that happening. So I don't know about you, Dan, but as we're stepping into these checks and we did the leak check, we did have done a couple of comm checks, and now we're talking about deorbit burn. My heart's starting to go. We're getting there.
It's starting to feel real. We're waking back up.
Yeah.
It's time to bring these guys home. And I mean, hearing the Corps call up, the water looks like glass from their ship views. That's exactly the type of thing we want to hear. The wind has picked up a tiny bit to 2.25 knots. It's about 2.6, a little under 2.6 miles per hour. So still well within our margins for what we were looking for acceptable splashdown weather. Right now, in the room behind us and over in Mission Control Houston, teams are just doing a final go, no go. And so that should wrap up over the next couple of minutes, and then we'll hear them call that up to the crew members when they get the final go to do the deorbit burn. But we'll be doing all of the other activities prior to that, including the claw and trunk separation, and then just getting ourselves ready for deorbit burn. So things are definitely going to start picking up in the next couple of minutes. Really, the next hour is really where things start to happen. But we do have a couple of moments now to get joined by a special guest.
Dragon, SpaceX is go for the deorbit burn, and the burn has been enabled.
That's a great call to hear.
Denver copy. Go for the deorbit burn, and we see it on board.
All right, so we just heard it. That means both the SpaceX and NASA teams are go for deorbit burn. So we are counting down to that deorbit burn. Still a bit of a ways off. It's just under an hour from now from starting for that 11.5-minute burn. But for now, as we are go for deorbit and return of Bob and Doug, we're going to send it over to the Johnson Space Center real quick, where Courtney Beasley is standing by in Mission Control Houston, along with NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine, also there in Houston. Courtney?
Thanks, Dan. Dan. Yes, joining me in a studio here at NASA's Johnson Space Center is NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine. Jim, thanks for joining us today. Another historic day for our agency, returning humans to Earth in a commercially built and operated spacecraft. How is this mission paving the way for the future?
Well, it's a great question, and I think it's really establishing the business model for the future. So you can see today I'm wearing my Artemis shirt. And when we go to the moon, we're going to go with commercial partners. And you know, NASA's goal here, we don't want to purchase, own, and operate the hardware the way we used to. We want to be one customer of many customers in a very robust commercial marketplace in low Earth orbit, but we also want to have numerous providers that are competing against each other on cost and innovation and safety, and really create this virtuous cycle of economic development and capability. And that's what today's return is going to represent. This is the next era in human spaceflight, where NASA gets to be the customer. We want to be a strong customer. We want to be a great partner, but we don't want to be the only ones that are operating with humans in space.
And while on board, Bob and Doug were, of course, conducting science experiments and spacewalks. And how are NASA's efforts on this station contributing to life back here on Earth?
So when we think about the International Space Station, it really is focused on how do we do those transformational activities that benefit human life here on Earth. And certainly, you know, when we think about advanced materials, industrialized biomedicine, these are the things that we're developing every day. Some examples would include, as far as advanced materials, very, very thin materials like an artificial retina for the human eyeball, so somebody who has macular degeneration might not have to lose their eyesight in the future. We can only create materials that thin in the microgravity of space. We cannot do it here in the gravity well of Earth. But that's just one of so many examples. When we think about how we compound pharmaceuticals, when we think about how we create immunizations for things like salmonella and other diseases, these are capabilities that are available to us because of the resource that is microgravity. But advanced materials, things like very pristine fiber optic cables, we call it Z-band, for example. These are all things that we think that there is a marketplace for the future. So look, right now we're doing commercial resupply of the International Space Station. As of today, when Bob and Doug come home safely, we will be doing commercial crew to the International Space Station. The next big thing is we need commercial space stations themselves. And in order to create the market for commercial space stations, we have to have these transformational capabilities that come from the microgravity environment. And that's really what we're developing right now.
And as you know, a big day for NASA today, but how about a big week? This week alone, we launched Mars 2020. Artemis 1's launch vehicle stage adapter was delivered to Kennedy Space Center, and here we are completing the first commercially crewed mission to the International Space Station. What are your thoughts on the state of the agency at this point?
So make no mistake, NASA's budget right now is the highest it's ever been in nominal dollars. And it's at $22 billion. The budget request that President Trump gave us, that is before the House and the Senate right now, is $25.2 billion. It's not just about sustaining capabilities like commercial crew, commercial resupply, the International Space Station. It's also about developing new capabilities so that the United States of America can stay the preeminent spacefaring nation. It's why we created the Artemis program to go to the moon sustainably with commercial partners and international partners to use the resources of the moon to live and work for long periods of time, and then take all of that knowledge onto Mars. And of course, as you mentioned on Thursday, we launched another Mars mission. The most sophisticated robot that NASA has ever developed is right now on its way to Mars, and we're going to prove that we can turn the carbon dioxide atmosphere of Mars into pure oxygen for life support. But there's so many other things. We're looking for life on another world. We're looking for signs of ancient life on Mars. We're talking about microbial life, but life nonetheless. And this is really a bright moment for NASA. I want to be clear, though. We need support from our members of Congress in both the House and the Senate. We need to be able to get that $25.2 billion budget that we have requested. And so I'm working with members of Congress and senators on both sides of the aisle every day, doing town halls across the country. We are in great shape. But in order to stay #1 in the world, we're going to need the resources that the president has requested.
Jim, thanks for joining us today. Such an exciting day. And in case you missed it just moments ago, both SpaceX and NASA are both a go for deorbit burn. So with that, we'll send it back to Dan and Kate at Hawthorne for the latest.
All right. Thank you so much, Courtney. Great to hear from the administrator. And we're in it now. We're kind of in the final stretch. This is what I feel like we've been waiting for the last couple of hours, and it feels pretty great to be here.
Yeah, it certainly does. In this next phase of the mission, Dragon has a series of steps to complete before returning Bob and Doug home. As you've heard us talk a little bit so far this morning, Dragon will maneuver to the correct attitude and jettison its trunk, which is the cylindrical, unpressurized part of the assembly. We need to expose the heat shield in order to prepare the capsule for atmospheric reentry. So we will. Oh, there we got a nice view of Bob and Doug in their suits. This is the first time we've seen them in their suits and in their chairs this morning. So there they are, tapping away, preparing to initiate the deorbit sequence. So let's talk a little. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just like in the lead up in the last couple of minutes, we heard they had good suit leak checks. As Kate described earlier, once the leak checks are complete, they don't keep the suit pressurized, so visors are open. They're going to have cool air running through their suits and the cabin and just getting ready for the ride.
Yeah. Whenever they are re-entering the atmosphere, the external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The internal temperature of the cabin, however, will stay around 85 degrees Fahrenheit. We have a couple of systems in place to keep it cool and comfortable for Bob and Doug as they are returning. Like Dan just said, there will be some cool air flowing through their suits. The cabin itself will also be purged with cooler air as well, so that will assist in making sure that the temperature stays pretty temperate inside the capsule.
And I mean, we're just 42 minutes and 50 seconds away from things really kicking up, and this is going to be when we really start to do that first maneuver to get ready to jettison the trunk, and then we'll do that claw and trunk separation. And then it's time for just kind of that final firing of those engines, that really just that downhill ride.
Yeah, those forward bulkhead thrusters, there are 4 of them, 4 of those Draco thrusters there at the top of the capsule near the nose cone. Those will be utilized to perform the deorbit burn. This burn is what will essentially give Dragon its final trajectory back home. This is the last burn that the capsule will perform. If you've been following along since yesterday afternoon, you know that there have been a number of burns completed. This deorbit burn will be the final one. It will last about 11.5 minutes. After that burn completes, we no longer need to utilize those Draco thrusters, and we want to protect the forward hatch up there, so we close the nose cone and lock it up. We're expecting that event to happen at 11:11 a.m. Pacific. About 10 minutes, or excuse me, 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Wow, mental math on air is hard. 25 minutes after that, the capsule will be re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and like I mentioned, approaching about 3,500 degrees, and that's because
we're in that heat of reentry, and so that's where things will really heat up for Bob and Doug on their reentry, and that's where we'll have that comms blackout. And we actually have a Twitter question that's germane to this right now, where Stephen asked, during the blackout, will you not be able to communicate with Bob and Doug, but you will be able to track them? And it's kind of a mix. We won't be able to talk to Bob and Doug. We won't be able to send or receive any data from the Dragon spacecraft. So we won't have basically telemetry-driven tracking, but we know exactly where they're going to be as their orbit's already been calculated. We've had this orbit calculated since yesterday, essentially. It's gotten fine-tuned as we've done those burns, but we'll know exactly where they're supposed to be, even though we can't communicate during that time.
Exactly. And even though we won't be able to send or receive signals or commands or telemetry, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous. At that point, it is driving itself anyway, so there's really nothing to be worried about. Bob and Doug's primary function at that point is to monitor all of the telemetry that they see on their screens and to stay comfy.
Yeah, and once they're through that initial entry, we'll have that part called entry interface, which we kind of explained as that's when the capsule's really experiencing aerodynamics. They've been flying around in the vacuum of space with no air, so no lift, drag, stuff like that on their capsule. And entry interface is where they're really starting to hit the atmosphere, and it's affecting the capsule. And it'll continue to use its Draco thrusters on the service section to really guide it back home.
Yeah, exactly. So speaking of guiding it back home, here come the parachutes. At 11:44 a.m. Pacific or 18:44 Universal Time, we're going to be deploying the drogue parachutes. Drogue chutes are utilized for a couple of reasons. One, to continue to further decelerate the vehicle and also to stabilize it. Like Dan said, it will be experiencing some of those aerodynamic pressures, and so we want to make sure that the capsule is well and stable before we deploy the main parachutes. Those main chutes will be deploying at 11:45 a.m. and there will be 4 of them. Those will essentially deploy, and it takes a couple seconds for them to fully inflate. So it might look a little funny at first, but we assure you that they are working properly, and it just takes a couple seconds for the air to continue to catch in them and for them to fully expand to their large rounder shape. So after those chutes deploy, it only takes 3.5 minutes for Bob and Doug to splash down. That'll be occurring at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal. And like we've mentioned before, our splashdown location is off the western coast of Florida. We're aiming for a location near Pensacola. Our recovery vessel Go Navigator is currently in location, ready and waiting for splashdown. They're actually going to be waiting about 3 nautical miles away from that splashdown point.
Yeah, we got the call that they were on station. We also got the call that the NASA WB-57 airplane is in the air, and we've actually seen a couple of brief spurts of video. That's the airborne asset that we'll have. That WB-57 is a high-altitude research plane that NASA flies. It's outfitted with a number of imaging cameras. The main one that we'll be seeing is an infrared one. If you watched the Demo 1 splashdown, which I'm sure you all did, you were able to see that first, and this is actually a glimpse of that WB-57 camera. We'll be getting this back, and if we acquire it the same time we did for Demo 1, we were able to see the capsule while it was still in that atmospheric reentry, so it was just this really bright light that all of a sudden lit up the sky, and that was the first view we got of Dragon. And so we'll use that to hopefully see during the entry, and then the initial parachute deploys, and then we'll have a couple more assets on the ground or on the water, on the boat, that will get a couple more views of Dragon as it delivers Bob and Doug safely to the ocean.
Yeah, so as you can hear, all of this excitement will be happening in pretty rapid succession. On your screen now, we can see closest to the camera, we have NASA astronaut Doug Hurley. He is the pilot or the commander for this particular mission, and then there now on the camera to the right is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. We are very fondly looking forward to bringing our space dads home this morning, and it looks like we mentioned before, that'll be happening in about an hour and a half, again targeting splashdown for 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:48 Universal Time. But like we mentioned before, the action really begins at the claw separation milestone, which is slated for 10:51 a.m. Pacific in about 38 minutes from now. So again, we are continuing to take questions this morning through Twitter using the hashtag AskNASA. Our next question comes to us from F1 Fanatic. Do the astronauts need to have face masks down during reentry? That is a great question. Very astute observation that those visors are in the upward position. So right now, these suits are unpressurized, and Bob and Doug are breathing just the normal cabin air. Those face masks, or visors as we refer to them, do need to be lowered and locked during the reentry period. We need the spacesuit to be fully enclosed during the more dynamic elements of operations, and certainly the reentry period is one of them. So we'll actually at one point during the deorbit burn preparation phase, we will actually hear communication between ground station, from ground here, Mission Control Headquarters at SpaceX to Bob and Doug, just to confirm and double check that those visors are in place where they should be. Our next question comes to us from Philip. Where exactly are the parachutes stored before deployment?
They are stored on in two separate compartments on the Dragon spacecraft, on a side of the vehicle that has a deployable panel. The drogue parachutes are stored in the kind of the upper part. It's called the upper bulkhead, and they're deployed by two drogue motors or mortars. So pyrotechnics that are fired to actually deploy those drogue parachutes. Just further down the panel, kind of at the base of the spacecraft, is where the four main parachutes are stored. And again, those get drawn out by the drogue chutes. There are redundant systems in place to make sure that if the first set of mortars don't fire, you have backups to get these chutes deployed. We're one fault tolerant on both the drogue parachutes and the main parachutes. So 1 out of 2 drogues and 3 out of 4 mains is what the vehicle's been rated and tested to. SpaceX has done a tremendous amount of testing on these parachutes, even within just the last several months in the lead up to the mission. As parachutes, obviously a very critical part of the reentry, and this is something that is very meticulously packed and documented before the start of any mission. And NASA assisting SpaceX, as we have some experts who have been involved in parachute missions for decades. But the parachutes are stored under deployable panels, and we'll see them basically fire open as the parachutes come out and deploy at the different altitudes.
Yeah, those panels are basically located above and below the side hatch panel. So if you are looking at the Dragon capsule, the anchor point for those parachutes will ensure that the side hatch will effectively be as far away from the ocean surface as possible, ensuring that we're able to expedite the process of egressing Bob and Doug from the capsule and the whole recovery process as a whole. Great question.
All right, our next one comes from Scott. He wants to know, what are the tablets on their legs used for? What kind of devices are they? I think you've heard him call out a few times that they're using iPads on board, and they're really just essentially their user manuals. They're able to dial up different procedures, checklists, things that they're looking for throughout their flight. They're able to Velcro them essentially to their suits, and just like the main displays in front of them, they're touchscreen enabled, and they have the touchscreen capable gloves in their suits. It's really just another information source. Dragon doesn't have the big paper manuals that we were used to in the shuttle era and things like that, just kind of streamlining everything as much as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we mentioned before, this is a demonstration mission, and so Bob and Doug's job here is to make sure that everything is working as it should be. So a lot of what they're doing is going to simply be monitoring, well, not simply, paying attention can be, especially whenever there's a lot going on dynamically around you, is staying focused can be tough. So it's not an easy job what they have coming up, but they will essentially be responsible for monitoring all the data and telemetry that is being received on screens. And part of the debriefing that will happen once they get back on land is quite simply, was there anything that happened in reality that you weren't expecting or differed from what you were instructed would occur? So making sure that in the future fully operational missions that we have, starting with Crew 1, launching later this year, that those crews are fully prepared and that we make those, essentially those instruction manuals that they do have access to as perfect as possible, because it is essential that we have correct information and that the crew is informed and aware of all the operations that are going on, regardless of whether or not they're not the ones necessarily commanding, because the vehicle is autonomous, but it is important that they do know what's going on.
All right, our next question comes from Sam. Might be the most important one of the day. Wanted to know if Bob and Doug can listen to the SpaceX webcast when they're inside the Dragon capsule. I mean, I certainly hope so. It's not like they have too much else on their mind.
Right.
No, they're not able to listen to us, but one kind of fun fact that always kind of makes us geek out a little bit is the crew members on board the space station will usually get NASA TV pumped up to them anytime their crewmates are launching or landing. So they're able to watch their friends and former crewmates as of just a few hours ago return home. So, Chris, if you're watching, hi.
Great question. Another one comes to us from Ruhr Rocker. Does the Dragon capsule have windows where Bob and Doug can look out? Absolutely. Actually, one of my favorite pictures that Doug Hurley has posted on Instagram to date was actually one of the first pictures he posted at the beginning of this mission was a shot of what he could see outside of Crew Dragon's windows. There is a window located on either side of the side hatch, and it certainly will provide visual confirmation that re-entry is happening. Like Dan mentioned before, they'll be able to see a little bit of the energy that's being expelled during the re-entry period. Some of those pieces of the ablative material, as they heat up and are designed to flicker away, they'll actually be able to see that from the windows themselves. So it'll be quite the fireworks show.
All right, our next one comes from Joe. Wants to know, does the Dragon capsule have Netflix? Another important question.
Yeah, the answer to that is no. As our views here of the capsule cycle through, we'll be able to see what their screens look like. There we go. So there in the center screen, we actually have the ground tracking map. As you can see there, actually it might be kind of hard to make out, but Dragon is actually crossing over the Atlantic Ocean, now approaching what looks like England and Ireland. So it will be crossing over into Europe soon. And also on those screens to the left and the right of that ground track screen were their telemetry screens. So those will be the interface that they use during the deorbit burn, and that's what they'll essentially use to make sure that everything is looking good and performing nominally.
Yeah, and I mean, that center screen that you just saw, that's essentially the same map that we've been looking at throughout our coverage here today. So they're looking at a lot of the same data that we're trying to give you guys down here on the ground. Just where are they over the Earth? Because it can be a little disorienting to look out the window and figure it out quickly. But they're able to see just how far along their orbit they are, where those milestones are coming up. So they can just, again, they're in a monitor mode and they're ready, locked and loaded to jump in if required. Our next question comes from Roshan, who 7-year-old Ian wants to know, why is the Dragon capsule cone-shaped? For a very specific reason, and it's why a lot of spacecraft are in a capsule shape. When they were trying to really figure out the most efficient way to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, both from handling the trajectory without having wings like a space shuttle, starting over. When they were really first trying to figure out how to best shape a spacecraft to efficiently and effectively re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in the safest configuration, where they essentially landed on was a cone shape. Or a capsule shape. There were very initial drawings that you could find all manner of spacecraft that were put into wind tunnels, but at the end of the day, all the way back in the early days of spaceflight, when we were in the Mercury and the very early days, they were able to determine that the capsule shape was really the most efficient. That shape of heat shield dissipated the heat the best, was the easiest to control, and was really the safest option. And physics haven't changed since the 60s, at least not a great deal. So that's why you still see a lot of capsule-shaped spacecraft, and it's really just for re-entering an atmosphere. Good question.
So there on your screen, again, we have live shots coming from Dragon Endeavour as it is making its way back towards Earth. We are approaching the final steps of the day, of the mission, in fact, and at 11:48 a.m. Pacific, 18:18 a.m. or p.m. Excuse me, Universal. We will have the splashdown of Dragon Endeavour. So right now, Bob and Doug are essentially cycling through, preparing for what we call deorbit burn initiation. This will be where the deorbit burn is what will be placing Dragon on its final trajectory to a specific landing location. That location there were 7 possible ones. We determined the best one for today's reentry to be off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. The recovery vessel Go Navigator is in place, ready and waiting. And it seems like Bob and Doug are pretty comfortable there. They are in their spacesuits. The leak check has been performed, and we got the call out that it was nominal, so everything good there. Right now, those visors are in the up position. They will be closed and locked whenever we get into the dynamic portion here upcoming in just a few minutes. Checking my timeline here.
We're just about 24 minutes and 20 seconds from things really picking up. That's when we'll start to get into the attitude to separate the trunk, and just about 8 minutes after that is when we'll start the deorbit burn. And again, that'll be the longest burn of Dragon's return journey. The latest timeline we got had it lasting for about 11 minutes and 22 seconds. It'll be the last firing of those forward bulkhead thrusters. The 4 Dracos at the very top of Dragon that'll eventually be covered up by the nose cone following the deorbit burn. And as we've said before, that deorbit burn is what commits them to coming home. When that happens, that capsule is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and that'll put them essentially on a collision course with planet Earth. It lines up their orbit to intersect with that splashdown point in the Gulf of Mexico. And while we have just a few more minutes until we get to that, we still have some questions coming in. Again, if you have one, jump over on Twitter, use the hashtag AskNASA. This one comes from Scarif Survivor, who wants to know, does Dragon lose radio data contact with satellite or ground stations during re-entry? And the answer is really everything. As that plasma builds up around the spacecraft, it essentially prevents signals being sent or transmitted or received by Dragon's antennas around the outside of the spacecraft. So it's both satellites and ground stations that it won't be able to communicate with. But again, Dragon continues flying itself. We know what its orbit is plotted out to be, so we know where it is, and we even know the expected time of that blackout, about 6 minutes. So it does lose contact with everything. We won't be able to hear from Bob and Doug until they're on the other side of that blackout, and then we'll reestablish communication with Dragon. All right, we have another one from Nettie Banda. Wanted to know how many seats are in Dragon.
So as you can see on your screen there are actually, I guess one is hidden, there are actually 4 chairs there available. We will be utilizing all 4 seats on the Crew 1 mission launching later this year. currently targeted for September. Right now, Bob and Doug are only occupying 2 of them, as this is a demonstration mission. So yeah, we will be utilizing all 4 of those seats in future missions, but as of right now, I believe it was on the launch portion of the mission, one of those seats was occupied by Tremor, who, if you've been following along, is the sequined dinosaur that was voted on by the 2 sons from Bob and Doug as what should be the 0G indicator. So Tremor was strapped into a seat during ascent, and when they got the okay to release him, he started floating into the capsule and gave us its sequined glory there on the edge of space.
All right. Well, again, just another time hack as we're coming up on these. We're just a little over 20 minutes from the start of all of our deorbit burn sequencing starting. So we're looking at that to really pick up at about 10:48 as we'll start getting into the attitude for trunk separation. And then we start basically executing a bunch of steps that are going to commit Bob and Doug to this reentry.
Yeah, we're looking forward to those. It'll be quite the journey. Now, of course, with respect to the deorbit burn, Bob and Doug will remain in their seats and strapped in for the entire duration. In fact, they won't be exiting those seats until they're able to egress or exit the capsule after it has splashed down and been recovered out of the ocean and safely resting in the nest of the recovery vessel. Along that note, our next Twitter question is from Brett. The question is, what is the orientation of the astronauts when seated? As in, do they face the front or the top of the capsule, and do they find it comfortable? Great question there. So in the views that we just had a couple minutes ago, they were, I guess what we would call in the reclined position. They were facing towards the top of the capsule. During the launch portion, whenever they were actually getting into the capsule, back in late May, the seats were actuated in the down position where they were facing towards the hatch. The angle of difference is about 40 degrees between the 2 positions. They actuate in order to make sure that whenever there are G's being experienced, that it is in the most comfortable and safely ergonomic way possible. So that's where seat or actuation comes in handy. Also, it also helps them to get in and out of the capsule. It's a little trickier whenever the seats are in the up position or when they're reclined facing upward toward the top of the capsule. As for comfort level, I've heard that they have found it pretty comfortable. The seats are actually custom fitted for each astronaut destined to be flying in it. So whenever a crew member is assigned to a mission, they will also be assigned a seat specifically. So there will be no mid-flight fire drills where everyone is switching seats. Everyone has a designated seat. They're essentially small, medium, and large, and the armrests are also customizable depending on how long the crew member's forearm is. So we have taken many steps with comfort in mind, as well as style. You've seen those spacesuits. They look pretty good, in my opinion, but those spacesuits are also similarly custom fitted for each individual crew member. So with the combination of the custom fit of the suit as well as the custom fit of the seats, we have aimed to make it as comfortable as possible in the event of some sort of situation where we need to wave off an activity for up to 48 hours. That's a long time to be in a confined space, even if you are highly trained like these guys. So yeah, making sure that they are as comfortable as possible while inside the cabin was certainly high priority.
All right, our next question comes from Richard. This one deals with kind of hygiene on the space station. Just curious how the astronauts that have been on station a while, how do they stay so clean cut? I know there's not a barber on board. Did they cut their own hair? It just looks clean cut. Do they shower, do laundry? How do they do it? They do have to cut their own hair. Even the current commander, Chris Cassidy, who's still on board, famously shaved his head once as his fellow crewmate Luca Parmitano was about to arrive on space station, just so he had some bald company. But they do have trimmers on board the International Space Station that have a vacuum attached to them, so they're not just getting hair just all throughout the cabin, as like everything else, hair would just tend to float around and get caught in the drafts of the air circulation on board. So they use basically vacuum cutters in order to give themselves haircuts. So that's how they're able to do it. No professional stylists up there, but they're able to make do and stay a little less shaggy.
Quick time check here as we just passed 10:30. It's now 10:32 here in California. We are less than 20 minutes away from our first event here on our list as Bob and Doug begin to continue to check off the boxes of their return home. That first event is claw separation. That's essentially the initiation of trunk jettison. All of that means that we will need to unlatch the claw from the trunk. That is the mechanism that holds and connects the trunk to the capsule, delivers fluid, telemetry, power, all that good stuff. We need to expose the trunk in order for the capsule to deorbit. So we will jettison the trunk and then we will begin a deorbit burn a couple minutes later. That deorbit burn is slated to begin at 10:56 a.m. Pacific, 18:56 Universal Coordinated Time. So in just under 23 minutes, we're expecting that to start. Once again, if you're just joining us, we've got some live views inside the Dragon Endeavour capsule. Bob and Doug there in their seats as they are making final preparations and doing final reviews as we get ready to initiate the deorbit sequence. Closest to the camera there is NASA astronaut Doug Hurley, and further away from the camera is NASA astronaut Bob Behnken. These are two incredibly wonderful humans. We affectionately call them our space dads here at SpaceX. It's been such an honor to be able to fly them. Of course, Doug Hurley was actually the pilot of the final space shuttle mission, STS-135, back in 2011. And honestly, when I heard that he was assigned to this mission, I cried because, just to have the opportunity to return the pilot of that final mission to the space station in this capacity is so cool. And I've loved following this mission since the moment that we started training for it here in Hawthorne.
Well, we know that they're ready. They've done all of their suit checkouts, everything to get themselves to this point. And once we begin these events, they're going to keep a very close eye, as again, crew is always in the loop to step in. But Dragon going to be executing all of these different maneuvers and separation events automatically via a pre-programmed timeline. We're continuing to count down. We'll have our first maneuver in a little under 13 minutes. We're a little over 15 minutes from the claw separation. That claw connecting the service module to the Dragon capsule itself. A series of quick disconnects will retract, cutting off any of the fluid and data paths between the two. And then shortly after that, just a few seconds later, the trunk will separate. And then we will be just less than 5 minutes away from that deorbit burn. Again, deorbit burn expected to last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Now, of course, during re-entry, Bob and Doug will be experiencing a couple of Gs. We're anticipating them to feel about 4 Gs during re-entry. This will make it a little difficult for them to move their arms around. Not impossible, but essentially what they're doing right now is reviewing all of the event details for splashdown, making sure that and I've said this before, they have rehearsed this both they've rehearsed the sequence of events in person with the recovery team, as well as through simulations here at Mission Control or at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. So at this point, because it will be difficult for them to maybe flip through to the exact part of the procedure they might want to review during the actual re-entry event itself, they are reviewing those now in preparation for that splashdown or for the re-entry sequence.
We've got another Twitter question. This from Laura Mountain. This one's pretty cool. Is it quiet in the Dragon, or does it sound like an airplane? Well, it doesn't sound like an airplane, at least not right now, as they're still flying through the vacuum of space. There's none of that rushing air. They'll get some of that once they're further down during their descent. And then they're also able to hear when the Draco thrusters fire. And one of the really cool things they've done to train the crew is SpaceX had a number of microphones placed throughout the cabin during that Demo 1 flight last year. And they were able to record what it sounded like inside through all of the major burns, the launch, the descent and landing, everything. And in the trainer upstairs here at Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters, they have speakers set up where, as they're doing simulations or practice runs of the different phases of the mission, they're able to hear what it should sound like inside Dragon as they're going through that. So I know that's one thing Bob pointed out is one of the things they're looking for is, does this sound like I was expecting it to? Does this look like, is that a light I'm supposed to see? All of those different things that for them is like reflex by the time they've trained it this much. All right, well, at this moment, we are less than 10 minutes away from this sequence starting. We are just about 9 minutes away, in fact. And first, we'll see that maneuver where we'll get into the proper attitude or point Dragon really in the right direction for the claw and trunk separation. We're essentially going to do a 90-degree yaw maneuver, turn Dragon sideways to make sure the trunk goes out and away, not coming out in front of or behind the capsule, essentially re-entering the atmosphere with the capsule. We're going to avoid that. And then Dragon will position itself for the deorbit burn. It's going to point those forward bulkhead thrusters into the direction that it's currently traveling. This is called a retrograde maneuver, and this is done specifically to, we're going to slow the capsule down, but more than anything, we're changing the perigee or the lowest point of the capsule's orbit. Again, essentially putting it up on an intersection point with that spot in the Gulf where we're coming home. Eight minutes, Kate.
We are getting close.
Dragon SpaceX for deorbit sequence.
Go ahead.
All right, Doug, we are 5 minutes out from deorbit sequence start. In addition, just wanted to inform you we are expecting some RADI-COM during claw and trunk set due to vehicle orientation.
Okay, copy. We see 445 left for the slew, and then RADI-COM during the claw set.
Good read back, Doug.
Kate, we are almost 4 minutes away from this starting.
Yeah, we just heard the call out there, confirmation from SpaceX Core down here at Mission Control to Crew Dragon that we now under 5, but at the time of the call, 5 minutes away from deorbit sequence start. So like we've been mentioning before, that deorbit sequence will involve separating from the trunk and performing the deorbit burn. As you may have noticed on your the ground tracking map that we've been showing you before, Bob and Doug were in their last orbit around Earth. I can't remember what the number was that you quoted earlier, Dan, but they have done thousands of orbits around Earth during their 2-month duration on station. So it is really exciting that the line that we see on that trajectory map is no longer fully around it. They're coming home.
We're not seeing 2 lines showing what their next orbit is going to be. They are on their final orbit of planet Earth, and this is their 1,024th orbit around our planet since they launched back in May of earlier this year. So we're counting down. We're under 3 minutes away from that first maneuver, and that's going to be a slew, as you heard Doug radio down. And that's essentially, we're going to change the attitude. We're going to use those Draco thrusters to essentially spin Dragon about 90 degrees to the side so we can jettison that trunk. And that'll be done in 2 stages. We'll do the claw separation and then the trunk separation. 2 minutes, 32 seconds, and counting. This is where things really pick up. This is where we really commit to coming home. And this is where we're in kind of the final stages of Bob and Doug's trip in outer space. Pretty soon we'll be seeing them in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, well, they are staying comfortable and continuing to monitor data and telemetry in the vehicle. Dragon is actually doing a couple of things itself to prepare for this deorbit sequence. Again, it's doing these things autonomously. It's isolating the thermal control system loops from the radiator. This is the system that will help keep Bob and Doug cool while they are re-entering the atmosphere. Like we've said before, the external temperature will reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, and that thermal control system is what helps keep them cool during that time. Also, Dragon is initiating the separation of the claw mechanism, which will terminate the data, the power, and the fluid connections between the capsule and the trunk. So right now, the vehicle is preparing to execute that, and we are anticipating execution of claw separation in 3 minutes and 35 seconds. So, we've been here for 10 hours, I think, at this point. The webcast as a whole has been going on for almost a little bit less than 24 hours. So, we're in the final moments here as Dragon is beginning its journey home to bring Bob and Doug back to Earth.
Yeah, this is the moment that Dragon is in the position to start coming home. The recovery team's already on station. They have been for a while out there off the coast of Pensacola. We are less than a minute from starting all of these carefully choreographed sequences to essentially split Dragon in half, get rid of that trunk so we have the capsule, point the heat shield back down towards Earth following that deorbit burn, and then we bring them home. We are just about 30 seconds away now from maneuvering Dragon to get ready to get rid of that claw first, and then that trunk separation. There will be about a 35-second difference or 35-second jump from separating the claw to separating the trunk, and we'll keep our eyes on the ground track for you and make sure we get kind of exact locations of when these separation events are occurring. We're looking for both the claw and the trunk to separate cleanly, and then it'll be less than 5 minutes until we do the deorbit burn.
Yeah, and after that, it'll...
Dragon SpaceX, deorbit sequence start.
All right.
Great news.
Never copied.
All right, so the Draco thrusters on Dragon starting to fire. It's now moving its way over to the trunk jettison attitude. We should be about 2 minutes away from the claw separation.
For those of you that are just tuning in, you are just in time. At this point in the mission, we are now beginning to execute the final steps of Dragon Endeavor's return to Earth. Right now, we are performing the claw separation slew, which basically means Dragon is maneuvering itself into position, into the proper attitude in order to separate the Dragon trunk. And that will be initiated first by separation of the claw. The claw is the mechanism that attaches the trunk and the and the capsule together. The claw is what delivers power and telemetry and fluids, and we need to expose the heat shield. Right now the trunk is blocking that. So we will jettison the trunk, and we will then have allow us to maneuver into the proper attitude to perform the deorbit burn, which Dragon has performed a number of burns so far overnight and early this morning. And this will be the final burn that the vehicle has to perform for this mission.
And we just heard confirmation Dragon's in the trunk separation attitude. We are now standing by for claw separation.
And we just heard confirmation of claw sep.
And with the claw separated, we're now standing by for the trunk separation in less than 30 seconds. Ten seconds till trunk separation.
And we just heard confirmation of trunk separation.
The trunk separation coming at 10:52 a.m. Pacific, with Dragon flying over the Indian Ocean just off to the west of Australia.
Dragon SpaceX, we showed nominal trunk jettison.
Oh yeah, we felt it.
All right. So the crew just got the call, nominal trunk separation. That's exactly what we were looking for. Next up is going to be that deorbit burn. Again, this is the longest burn of their trip home. This is the longest firing of those thrusters, and the last time we're using those forward bulkhead thrusters.
Exactly. Those forward bulkhead thrusters, like Dan just said, that's what we're using to perform the deorbit burn. Once we do that, we will then be able, that deorbit burn will last for 11.5 minutes. Once that is completed, we don't need to use those thrusters anymore, so we will close and lock the nose cone in preparation for re-entry.
So we're a little under 3.5 minutes from the start of the deorbit burn. Again, our sequence of events has started. We're able to separate that claw at 10:51 a.m. Pacific. It's 17:51 GMT or Universal Time. And at 10:52, just a minute later, the trunk separating while Dragon was flying just off to the west of Australia. So claw separated, trunk separated. Next up, deorbit burn.
Yeah, right now, Dragon is running exclusively on battery power now that the trunk is separated. Also, right now, telemetry is looking really good for the vehicle. The nitrox system is primed for cabin and suit cooling, and the heat shield is exposed and ready for atmospheric re-entry. Like I said before, that nitrox system, which is essentially the air that we breathe every day down here on Earth, nitrogen-oxygen combination, a mixture. It's the same stuff that they put in your scuba tank if you are a scuba diver. The nitrox system is used to cool the cabin and the suit to keep the crew comfortable during the re-entry phase. They will actually have cold air flowing through their suits themselves, as well as through the cabin itself. So a two-pronged approach to maintaining a comfortable temperature there inside the capsule. Like we said, the next event that we have coming up will be the deorbit burn, which we're expecting that to commence in 1 minute and 40 seconds. According to the ground tracking map there, Dragon is approaching the southwestern coast of Australia. We are less than a...
We're excited.
Jinx.
We are inside a minute to deorbit burn. And again, one more time, this is the long one. This is expected to last 11 minutes, 22 seconds. This is that burn that commits the Dragon to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. And you can get kind of a sense of just how far they're going to go. By the time they fire this burn, they're just going to be off to the southwest of Australia. And this is going to realign their orbit to intersect with that point off the coast of Pensacola where they're going to be splashing down.
Yeah, this is the moment where Dragon is fully committed to the re-entry point. Again, we are aiming for just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Our recovery ship Go Navigator is ready and waiting to begin the recovery process right after splashdown occurs. Once again, if you're just joining us, we are now in the final steps of the deorbit sequence. The deorbit burn will be starting here in just a couple of seconds.
And we just heard confirmation deorbit burn has begun. That coming at 10:56 a.m. Pacific. Again, while the Dragon spacecraft just off the southwestern coast of Australia. So here we go. 11 more minutes to go.
I'm ready, and I'm sure it's safe to say that Bob and Doug are ready. They've done a number of interviews over the last few weeks while they were on station, and just the excitement and the enthusiasm for the mission is palpable. Just the opportunity to be able to fly these two incredible humans to the International Space Station and back is such an honor, and we're just really excited to get our space dads home safely and back to their families as quickly as possible. This deorbit burn that we are currently in, it will last 11 minutes and 22 seconds.
Already a little more than a minute 10 in counting, so we have about 10 minutes to go. Just heard a call. The propulsion system performing nominally. That's the word we always want to hear. We always like to hear. So just under 10 minutes to go left in this burn.
And all within the last 10 minutes, again, it seemed like we had slow progressive events all morning, and then boom, within the last 10 minutes, we had a couple of things happening. Dragon maneuvered itself into the appropriate position to jettison its trunk, and it did so successfully, nominally, and then it initiated the deorbit burn just a couple minutes ago. Like I mentioned earlier, this deorbit burn is the last time those 4 forward Draco thrusters will fire, forward kind of meaning at the top of the capsule. Dragon Endeavour has not yet entered Earth's atmosphere, but this deorbit burn is what will line the vehicle up and put it on its final trajectory to the landing site in the Gulf of Mexico. Right now, although we can't see it at the moment, Bob and Doug are using their screens to keep tabs on the burn duration, Draco thruster firings, and trajectory details such as entry angle, capsule perigee, and how much distance is remaining until that deorbit burn terminates. So Dragon is flying itself, so all they really have to do is stay strapped in their seats and keep tabs on things. So while this burn is completing, again, we're just a few minutes into it. It'll last 11 minutes and 22 seconds. We have a couple more events coming up afterward. Let me check my timeline here real quick. In just under 44 minutes, we will have the initial parachute deployment. So that is essentially when we will be deploying the drogue parachutes, the small parachutes that are designed to further slow down the capsule as it is re-entering the atmosphere, as well as stabilizing it. And then a minute after that, we will deploy the drogue parachutes, and that is targeted for 11:44 a.m. Pacific, 18:44 Universal. And then just a couple minutes after that, we will have splashdown. So again, that's all in just under 44 minutes. Right now, we are performing the deorbit burn.
We've got a little over 7 minutes left in this burn. And the only performance call we've gotten so far is everything's still looking good with the propulsion system on Dragon. Once this burn completes, we will have kind of a couple minutes, about 3 minutes to catch our breath before things pick right back up and we get the nose cone closed. And then there'll be a bit more of a gap, and at that point they will maneuver Dragon to its entry attitude, essentially heat shield pointed down and into the line of velocity, and that heat shield protecting them from the heat of re-entry. Temperatures getting up to about 3,500 degrees on the Dragon spacecraft. But everything looking good. We're about 5 minutes into this deorbit burn. Again, it started right at 10:56 a.m. Pacific time, 17:56 GMT. Dragon was flying about 260 statute miles just off the southwestern coast of Australia.
So right now, during this burn, we just heard a call out that we're halfway through the burn and everything is looking great, everything performing nominally. During this burn right now, Bob and Doug are currently monitoring the deorbit tool, which, like I said earlier, captures things like the perigee, the reentry interface, how much distance remains before the burn itself is terminated. They're also monitoring the burn duration and the firing of those Draco thrusters located there at on the forward bulkhead of the capsule. There on your screen, you actually can see what Bob and Doug are seeing right now. That is that tool on their screen. So on the left and the right of the center screen, that is the deorbit. That is the deorbit monitoring tool.
Just past 7 minutes into the burn, a little over 4 minutes remaining. Everything's still looking good with Dragon Ship Endeavor's deorbit burn to commit it to coming home. Everything continuing to be on track for our splashdown. Again, our splashdown time right at 11:48 and 24 seconds. Pacific was the calculated time. It would be typical if we're a couple seconds on either side, but that time is 18:48 GMT or universal. But we're already through several of the really major steps to initiate this re-entry. The claw is separated, the trunk is gone, the deorbit burn has begun, and we're more than halfway through, just a little under 3.5 minutes remaining.
There on your screen is a shot of our Mission Control Center here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, where the Dragon operators and mission leaders are there monitoring Dragon's progress. They continue to watch the propulsion data and all the GNC data, making sure that everything is looking healthy and nominal.
We're just about 2 minutes, 30 seconds until the end of this burn. We'll listen for the call out up to the crew on the performance of the burn, and then they'll start moving into the next steps. Again, we'll get about a 3-minute breather before the next major milestone comes up when we get ready to close the nose cone, that protecting the docking ring, guidance, navigation, and control sensors, and also these 4 forward bulkhead thrusters that are currently performing the deorbit burn during the actual re-entry process. So we are at just under 2 minutes from the conclusion of the deorbit burn.
Again, Dragon is committed to its splashdown point. There is no going back.
Yeah, we already have the recovery team ready and on standby. They've been there for quite some time now. Here, and we have about 90 seconds left in the burn. Weather looking great at the splashdown site off Pensacola. Winds just around 2.5 miles per hour. Sea being described as like glass by the Corps here in Hawthorne, radioing up to the crew. Ended up getting fantastic weather for this first crewed splashdown of Dragon. We are 1 minute away from the end of deorbit burn.
Again, this burn is placing Dragon on its final trajectory to the landing site off of the coast of Pensacola, Florida. That is in the Gulf of Mexico. And our recovery vessel, Go Navigator, and the recovery team are ready and waiting to see Bob and Doug come back through the atmosphere. Like we said, this deorbit burn, during this deorbit burn, not re-entering the atmosphere just yet. That won't happen for about an hour.
We are on
Dragon, SpaceX, deorbit burn complete, performance nominal, nose cone closure initiated.
Nominal burn, nose cone in work.
all right. Deorbit burn complete. We heard the call, nominal burn. Bob and Doug are on their way back home. This burn commits them to re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. Ooh, all we have left now is to wait. That was really one of the last major moments before they start re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We'll have the nose cone closure coming up next. That should be coming in just a couple of minutes, as we had about a 3-minute span between the end of the deorbit burn and that moment.
Yeah, the nose cone is actually currently in the closing process, so it doesn't just snap shut. It does slowly close and lock. So right now, that nose cone is in the process of moving back into the closed position, and we will hear the call out for whenever it has fully closed and whenever the latches have secured.
Seeing some data, it looks like it's about halfway there. It's opened a little bit more than 90 degrees. I think the exact count was 110 degrees opening range or range of motion for the nose cone. So we're a little more than halfway now to getting that nose cone closed.
So I have just heard that we have a visual on nose cone closure. So it'll take a minute for the hooks to close in. They close in a series. So the first series will close and then the second will follow, and that'll take about a minute to complete.
All right, well, as we just wait for the finish to that nose cone closure, we'll have a bit of time again. We'll have about 20 minutes, or a little over 21 from right now, until we really start re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. We're expecting that entry interface in about 21 minutes. And then right around that time, we'll also be looking for that blackout we've been talking about. We've had a little bit of what we call Radicom at this point, so you'll hear kind of some sporadic interruptions in the audio transmission just because of how Dragon was oriented for the trunk jettison and for the actual deorbit burn. But that blackout period will be due to the plasma that builds up around the capsule, interfering with those antennas either sending or receiving data.
So I've heard the call out that the first set of hooks for nose cone closure are in motion. So this will complete in 2 sets. The first set is now in motion, so really good news to hear that. Everything looking good so far. Like I mentioned before, in the background, Dragon has inhibited the forward bulkhead Draco thrusters that we just used to complete that deorbit burn. This is to ensure that it's safe to latch that nose cone shut for reentry. Also, the vehicle has initiated the nitrox purge. Nitrox is simply a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen. It's what we breathe, and the nitrox that is being purged into the system is cooled, so allowing that cool air to circulate around the cabin, but also inside of Bob and Doug's suits, will help to keep them cool and comfortable during re-entry, which will be coming up in about 20 minutes. We're currently tracking 23 minutes and 20 seconds until entry begins. So in case you're just joining us at this point, the nose cone has closed. The forward thrusters have been disabled, and we are latching the nose cone. Currently underway with the first set of hooks, the first of 2 sets. And we just had confirmation that the first set of hooks is closed, so now the second set will begin to close as well.
As we mentioned, after this nose cone's fully closed, we'll have a couple of minutes to catch our breath again, about 20 minutes or just under 20 minutes until Dragon will start to maneuver itself to the entry attitude, essentially pointing the heat shield in the direction of travel as it's going to be leading the way through their reentry through the Earth's atmosphere. We'll look to run into that communications blackout at about 36 minutes after the hour, expecting that to last for about 6 minutes, and then we'll get that back shortly before we deploy the drogue parachutes, followed just less than a minute later by the main parachutes, and by that point hopefully we should have some views of Dragon re-entering the Earth's atmosphere and parachuting to a splashdown in the Gulf.
So there in the front row of Mission Control in the center, you can see CEO Elon Musk and our President Gwen Shotwell sitting side by side at those center consoles. In addition to those two, the room is filled with Dragon operators and mission leaders who are continuing to monitor the health and telemetry of the crew and the capsule. Right now, nose cone closure is underway. The first of 2 sets of hook latching has completed. And we just heard a call out that the
SpaceX nose cone is secure for entry.
Copy. We see it on board.
All right, great confirmation there. Back and forth from Mission Control here to Bob and Doug up in Dragon Endeavour. That Bob and Doug have also confirmed on their displays that the nose cone has closed nominally and it is secure for entry.
All right, so that nose cone close completion. A lot of tongue twisters with this right now. Coming with Dragon still flying over the South Pacific. It is on its way home. We're going to gradually start to see its altitude dip. Right now, already only 207 miles over the Earth's surface. It was at about 260 miles when it was still over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean off the southwestern coast of Australia when it fired its engines for that deorbit burn. So its altitude going to continue to drop. Once it gets to about 100 kilometers in altitude, or about 62 miles, it's going to begin what's known as entry interface, and that's when it really begins to start to feel the effects of the Earth's atmosphere. Will once again be experiencing lift and drag as it's no longer in that near vacuum environment in low Earth orbit.
So we're essentially stepping into the second half of entry. Dragon is now beginning to flush nitrox into the cabin and continuing to top it off in Bob and Doug's suits as well. Again, this is cool air essentially flowing through the cabin and the suits. This is what will allow them and the cabin itself to remain comfortable during reentry while those external temperatures reach 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point in time, Dragon's orientation is such that the heat shield is pointing forward, if you will, leading the capsule toward the landing site. If you've been following along over the last couple of days, you know that weather has been a big ticket item for us. The recovery team has been busy over the last week working to determine the selection of a landing site. In order to increase the options for space station departures, the team identified a total of 7 possible splashdown locations. In order to meet NASA's timeline requirements for crew recovery, these potential splashdown locations have to be close to a port, and they have to be close to medical facilities. So with all of that in mind, you add the ever-evolving weather conditions of Florida, but also that tropical storm Isaiah that was moving through. And it's easy to see how determining that landing site is quite a complex process. Since Dragon is capable of splashdown on either side of the Florida Panhandle, we in fact have 2 identical and fully equipped recovery vessels ready to support. One in the Gulf of Mexico, which is what we're utilizing today, Go Navigator, and the other located off the east coast of Florida, able to service landing sites in the Atlantic Ocean. That one is Go Searcher. Like I mentioned, today we'll be splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico, just off the coast of Pensacola, Florida. Go Navigator, that recovery ship I just mentioned, is in place and ready and waiting for Bob and Doug. The WB-57 plane, if it hasn't taken off already, I'm sure it will be very soon.
It's in the air.
Okay, great. That's what will provide our first views of Dragon during reentry. We'll get a thermal cam off of that airplane, allowing us to see the capsule as it is reentering the atmosphere. If you were tuned in for our Demo 1 broadcast, it was basically a big ball of light coming at us. We'll also have cameras on board the recovery vessel, so as Dragon gets closer and is deploying those parachutes, we will also be able to have hopefully some really clear footage of that all occurring as well.
All right, so Dragon's altitude continuing to dip. Right now about 174 miles over planet Earth. We're under 11.5 minutes from where we expect to hit entry interface. So that's where Dragon will really start feeling the effects of being in a denser atmosphere. And then we are still tracking that blackout to come right around that same time. We are under 27 minutes away from splashdown. So we are under 27 minutes away from Bob and Doug being on planet Earth for the first time since May 30th.
To kind of put everything in perspective, the Dragon capsule departed from the International Space Station several hours ago, but according to what Dan just said, it's essentially halfway home just based on altitude alone. So the International Space Station is about 250 miles above Earth's surface. I think right now it's between 250 and 300. I think right now it's about 263 miles above Earth's surface. So based on that telemetry that Dan just read off, is from an altitude standpoint, Dragon is halfway home, and yet that second half is going to be covered in the next 27-ish minutes while we wait for splashdown and recovery, versus the several hours that we've been covering since yesterday.
Yeah, and we will continue to see its speed drop as it's dropping out of orbit. It's starting to hit the atmosphere. It's starting to slow from the effects of that friction, generating the heat on the heat shield and building up the plasma eventually around the spacecraft. Its speed's going to continue to drop. It's already below 17,000 miles an hour, and it'll drop to essentially a terminal velocity of about 350 miles an hour right as those drogue chutes deploy. And those are going to pop out when sensors on the Dragon spacecraft, both GPS and pressure sensors, tell the spacecraft it's at the right altitude, and then those will automatically deploy. Those drogues coming out of the top section of the spacecraft using 2 mortars, or pyrotechnics essentially, to deploy those to do the initial slowing and stabilizing of the Dragon capsule.
Yeah, then after that, the main parachutes will pop out and further decelerate it to about 119 miles per hour. And then that will continue to decelerate. And by the time that the capsule is splashing down in the Gulf of Mexico, it's only going 15, 16 miles per hour. So significant reduction in speed there over just the course of a couple minutes. That, of course, is a pretty comfortable speed. The way that the astronauts have described it previously with other types of missions also landing down, doing land landings at about the same rate. They said it feels like you're in a minor fender bender.
Yeah, you're definitely running into something. You'll feel it, but they do a lot of work with the seats and the restraints with these crew members just to make sure, while it may be a fender bender, you got more than a seatbelt essentially holding you in. So they're very secure in their suits and in their seats, and they're going to stay in there even after Dragon touches down. We'll still have communication with Dragon. Once they're in the water, it'll stay powered on. Probably most importantly, the air conditioner will continue to work while they're in the capsule in the now Gulf of Mexico, and much warmer temperatures than they've seen for the last couple of months. And we'll still be able to talk to them from here in Hawthorne, and the recovery teams will be able to as well.
Yeah.
One of the things we might see them do, depending on sea states and everything after they touch down and the crew themselves, they'll still have a couple of demonstration tasks potentially to carry out. They have a satellite phone inside of the capsule that has its own satellite antenna integrated into Dragon, and they're able to use that independent of Dragon's communication system. So one thing we might hear them do is do a test call on that to the teams here in Hawthorne. We wouldn't be able to hear the call, but you would hear the go to do it over the Dragon to ground audio that we've been listening to this entire time. So still have a couple of demonstration steps, essentially, as, again, this is a test flight. This is the flight to really prove out Dragon systems, to bring crew members from Kennedy Space Center to the space station and return them safely to Earth. And so far, we have had a flawless ride downhill. We've completed the deorbit burn. Dragon is continuing to drop down. It's right now at about 132 miles over the Pacific Ocean. Pretty soon we're going to see its ground track cross over Central America, out over the Gulf, culminating in that splashdown in the Gulf just off the coast of Pensacola.
Dragon SpaceX for entry brief.
Go ahead.
Okay, Doug, we have no update to timing because the burn went great, and your vehicle is still looking really good for entry. No health issues at this time.
Okay, Dragon copies. Thank you.
In addition, the recovery team is go, and the weather is still great. Winds are about 2 knots and waves about 1 foot. From the ship, they're reporting very calm. How copy?
Copy. Good weather at the landing area. Thank you.
Okay, and last piece is that we do expect some additional RADI-COM during entry prep 2 due to vehicle attitude. So if you can get us your entry check report a little bit prior to entry prep 2, we'd appreciate it.
Copy. We'll go.
Okay, thanks, Doug.
So there we just had a bit of a briefing between Mission Control and Bob and Doug up in Crew Endeavor, just confirming with them that the deorbit burn was great and that the timing on their pads doesn't need to be updated. We are able to upload new trajectory calculations, including times that remain live depending on how the burn goes, and at this point in time, those don't need to be updated. It is important that they do remain accurate because Bob and Doug, their primary mission right now is to continue to monitor the vehicle status and telemetry and data being presented to them on their touchscreen displays in front of them, and so during the more dynamic events, they certainly want to be aware when things like parachute deploy will be happening and when splashdown is expected. So making sure that the timeline of events, the sequencing is accurate is certainly important in order for them to stay aware and updated of upcoming events.
Just another quick position check. Dragon still out over the Central Pacific, down to about 108 miles in altitude. And we're expecting that entry interface to come up in the next 4 minutes or so. Again, at that point, Dragon should be at an altitude of right around 62 statute miles, or about 100 kilometers. and that's when it really starts to feel the effects of the atmosphere. It starts to experience the lift and drag and other atmospheric effects it's been free from while flying in the near vacuum of low Earth orbit. So continuing to drop in altitude, still looking for an on-time splashdown, should just be about 19 minutes from now. And just a reminder, we do have that blackout period coming. So as they continue to dip in the Earth's atmosphere and get lower and lower, the atmosphere gets thicker and thicker, and it's going to generate more and more heat, eventually heating up the outside of Dragon to 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And as it hits that peak heating, it'll also be forming a plasma around the spacecraft. So we do expect to lose comm for about 6 minutes.
SpaceX Dragon crew entry preps are complete.
SpaceX copies. Entry prep complete. Thank you.
The call from Spacecraft Commander Doug Hurley. Entry preps are complete. So they are on board, they are monitoring, they are ready to come home.
Yeah, and as of right now, entry prep should have also included final configuration of their flight suits. So we had a question from our social media earlier if the visors will be up or down. Those visors should be down at this point as part of that entry prep check. In that last briefing, we also heard that the weather is looking good. In a previous report, the phrasing was, "It looks like glass." And that is certainly ideal for a water splashdown. That being said, the recovery timeline, Bob and Doug should be out of the capsule within an hour after splashing down. So good to hear that the weather is good. We saw blue skies and a couple of white fluffy clouds out there in the Gulf of Mexico as we got views from our recovery vessel Go Navigator. But glad to hear that conditions are sustaining, and that winds also are looking really good, around 2.5 miles per hour. So hardly anything at all. Really couldn't ask for better conditions for a splashdown day.
We kind of threaded the needle once again, almost like we did on launch with the weather today. Your upper limits for wind were about 10 miles an hour, so we're well below that threshold for a splashdown today. Dragon coming up on 82 miles in altitude, continuing to dip down. We're expecting that entry interface to start pretty soon, where the vehicle itself is really going to start heating up. It's going to continue to use its Draco thrusters to maintain its attitude as it continues through the Earth's atmosphere, and we'll have that comm blackout coming up in just a couple of minutes as well. The cabin purge has started again. This is when they're going to flush the cabin of Dragon with cooled air. They're also going to do a suit purge, running cooled nitrox through the suits for Bob and Doug just to keep things at a comfortable temperature for them as the capsule goes through the re-entry and starts to heat up.
Like we said, we are anticipating a brief blackout period where we're unable to communicate with the capsule. We're expecting that to start in exactly 3 minutes. That will last for 6 minutes total, and during that time we will be unable to command the vehicle or receive telemetry. That being said, Dragon is designed to be fully autonomous, so it's driving itself anyway. So Bob and Doug will stay fastened in their seats. Like I said, that anticipated loss of signal, or as you'll hear it called LOS, is anticipated to last for just 6 minutes. During that blackout period, the capsule will encounter what's known as entry interface. This is when the capsule is now really in the Earth's atmosphere and beginning to be subject to aerodynamic forces. This is also when a lot of that friction will begin to build up and raise the external temperatures.
Dragon SpaceX, we show 2 minutes until predicted calm blackout. We will see you on the other side at 1842.
Dragon copies 1842. We'll talk to you then.
So there's that heads up communication from Mission Control to Dragon Endeavour, confirming that comms blackout. Like I was saying, during the blackout, the Dragon capsule will be going through entry interface, where it is encountering aerodynamic forces, really starting to build up the external temperature and that external temperature will reach about 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit. However, the interior of the cabin is environmentally cooled, so Bob and Doug should remain comfortable during their descent. There will be cool air flowing not only through the cabin itself, but also through their suits. The suits have sensors on them that are able to detect the temperature inside that suit, and once that sensor reads that it has reached the maximum temperature threshold, it'll flush the suit with some cool air and really circulate and cool it down.
All right, well, we are right around that estimated blackout time. As we heard the call, we'll see them on the other side, expected to regain that communication at about 42 minutes after the hour. So for these next 6 minutes, they're already less than 60 miles in altitude. And this is when the capsule is really heating up during that reentry, reaching temperatures of around 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit, as again you're essentially hitting the atmosphere more than 17,000 miles an hour, and the friction building up that plasma around the spacecraft. And that's what's going to prevent us from talking to Bob and Doug or getting data back from the spacecraft for the next 6 minutes. Its flight computers are in control, though. It's going to continue to maintain its appropriate trajectory and attitude, having attitude determination devices on board the capsule, not reliant on communications with satellites. And it's going to continue dragging down the correct path for this splashdown off the coast of Pensacola. So we are in that blackout period. We're going to continue to stand by until we get them on the other side. All right, and just about 2 minutes after we get acquisition of signal, AOS, back with Dragon, we're going to be looking for those parachutes, and we should hopefully be getting some views from a couple of our assets out at the landing zone, including our WB-57 high-altitude research plane, which is going to be relying on Dragon's telemetry to actually lock onto it in the sky and give us an infrared view of the capsule during the final stages of reentry. We're going to be looking for the drogue deploys at about 44 minutes after the hour. Those will be 2 drogue shoots that are going to come out when the vehicle is still moving at about 350 miles an hour. And it'll be at an altitude of about 18,000 feet. They'll come out and do some initial slowing and stabilization of the spacecraft, and then less than a minute later, they'll detach, and the 4 main parachutes will deploy. You'll see them come out and look kind of closed up initially, and then they'll do what's known as reefing, opening up in really 2 different stages just to minimize the immediate loads on the parachutes themselves. Those main parachutes will come out at an altitude of about 6,500 feet, with Dragon already slowed down to 119 miles an hour, and they'll do the rest of the slowing the whole way down until we splash down in the Gulf of Mexico. We should be 10 minutes away from splashdown.
So right now we're getting our cameras on the WB-57 airplane, which is in the area, getting those cameras ready to give us our first glimpse.
We should still have about 3 minutes left, a little less than 3 minutes, until we anticipate reacquiring our signal and our connection with Bob and Doug in the Dragon spacecraft.
If you're just tuning in, we are in a blackout period that we were expecting. This blackout period will last a total of 6 minutes, and we're about halfway through there now. At the moment, Dragon is re-entering the Earth's atmosphere, and due to the plasma building up on the exterior of the vehicle, we're unable to communicate or send commands, but Dragon is fully autonomous. It is steering itself. And right now, Bob and Doug are flying home.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
So we're still inside that anticipated blackout window. It does look like we are getting maybe some sporadic data starting to peek through, which is why you heard that communications check with the spacecraft.
Dragon SpaceX comm check.
Dr. has you loud and clear. We're about 3.9 G.
Copy. We've got you 5x5 as well, Doug. Looking good, and you can expect an automated chute deployment.
Copy. It'll chute deployment.
All right, really good news there. We have come out of the blackout period, and we have reestablished connection with Dragon Endeavour, with NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on board.
We were able to reacquire that communication a little bit earlier than expected, and now we are just waiting. We should just be about 2.5 minutes away from that initial drogue chute deploy.
Yeah, 2 minutes and 26 seconds.
AGPS has converged.
Copy that.
You may have heard earlier that Bob and Doug are currently experiencing 3.5 Gs. Not too bad. That's about what they pulled during the ascent phase. Just like a mild roller coaster. So the vehicle is now over the Gulf of Mexico. It is approaching the landing zone off the coast of Florida near Pensacola. And there we have our first shot.
There it is. The first view from the WB-57 airplane. It is dipping in and out a little bit. This is going to be an infrared camera showing us Dragon re-entering. We have that comm back with Bob and Doug. You heard AGPS is converging. Dragon has 3 GPS units that it uses actually in the parachute deployment process, as it helps, along with the pressure sensors, really give a solid altitude to the flight computers on when these are supposed to deploy. We're standing by for the drogue chute deployments. We should be just under 5 minutes away from splashdown.
Passing 15 kilometers, brace for drogue window.
Copy, we're braced.
Just about 14 kilometers in altitude, 8.4 miles, continuing to descend.
There on your screen, we have a shot of the capsule as it is preparing to deploy those initial parachutes, the drogue parachutes. Again, these parachutes help slow the vehicle down even further and help stabilize in preparation for main chute deployment. Right about now, the capsule is going about 400 miles per hour, decelerating quickly.
And standing by for drogue deploys.
Visual, 2 drogues out.
There on your screen, we have visual confirmation of those 2 drogue deployments.
Copy 2 drogue.
All right, so 2 of 2, the drogues now out. They're going to
Reconfiguration, thank you.
So essentially what just happened there is they reconfigured.
And Solo, if you can just relay status of the fast boats and the recovery as you get them, we would appreciate it.
You bet, absolutely, Doug. Wilco.
So what just happened there, you heard comms reconfiguration. That's essentially looping Bob and Doug's communication into the into the recovery team, so that if they can hear feedback from Bob and Doug directly as well. Now, we talked a little bit about
SpaceX Endeavor. You can let Ben and James know we're doing pretty good so far.
Okay, we'll let the flight docs know that you're feeling good so far. Thanks for that update.
Really good news there to hear that they're feeling good, and they can let the flight surgeons know that all is well inside Dragon Endeavor.
All right, and it sounds like we do have one of our folks that's on location there with the recovery forces, NASA's Brandy Dean. She's joining us by satellite phone. Brandy, if you can hear me, I mean, what is it like right there on the water? What was it like to watch
Dragon rear,
watch them splash down?
For the test objective. So stand by at the console once we get it up and operating and let you know.
Okay, SpaceX copies. We'll be ready for that in just a couple minutes. We should have the go for you in just a moment. Please stand by.
I can hear you, but they're good.
There in the center of your screen, Dragon capsule, waiting for the fast boats to approach and begin the rigging process. And there on the left-hand side of your screen, we can see that second fast boat come into view.
Dragon, SpaceX, we are go for recovery personnel to approach. Expect personnel alongside in just under a minute.
Dragon copies. Thank you.
All right, so they're starting to move in. As Kate just said, that first boat's going to go in, sniff around the capsule for any traces of hypergalls. The second one's going to start rounding up the parachutes, which we're getting some really cool views from the WV-57 still flying overhead. Looking down, you can see the parachutes in the water, and the second boat start to gather them up. We'll try one more time real quick. We have NASA's Brandy Dean out with the recovery forces. Brandy, if you can hear me, what was it like to watch this Dragon come down under parachutes?
Oh, it was amazing. I wish everybody could have had my view. It was such a beautiful sight. It was a gorgeous day. The water is calm, really the best weather we could have asked for. And we heard the sonic booms as it made its way back there, and we were able to find it early on as the parachutes were deploying. So it was very exciting for everybody who was gathered here.
That's incredible. We actually had some questions from people if you'd be able to hear the sonic boom, and we weren't sure. So I'm really glad you just answered that for us. I mean, we talked so much about the weather. You said it looks great. What was it like on the ride out there? Has it just been kind of clear skies and clear seas the whole way?
I'm not sure if you can hear me right now, but I think you're asking about the weather with clear skies. There are just a kind of a circle of clouds along the horizon, very low, but we were able to see the parachute far above the clouds and follow it all the way until it splashed down.
All right, well, we're not getting any views on the boat, so what kind of activity is taking place right now? We're able to see the fast boats approaching the capsule. What's everybody doing on the boat to just kind of get everything ready?
The boat's also making its way towards the capsule. I can't see it with my bare eyes yet, but we're getting closer. Everybody's been kind of standing by, holding ready positions for quite a while now. So as soon as it splashed down, you're able to just stand and start working on their own activities.
All right, copy that. Well, we're going to keep watching from here. Thanks for calling in, and thanks for being out there with everybody and getting us these great views. It's really incredible. Thanks, Brandy. Hope to get you back in port soon, and we'll talk to you back in Houston.
So there on your screen, camera view change. That is a view coming to us from Go Navigator, the recovery vessel. The two fast boats are out there getting ready to install the rigging equipment required to hoist the Dragon out of the water. The other fast boat is actually collecting the parachutes from the water. We definitely want to bring those back on board with us. But shortly here, we should actually see one of the team members crawl up onto the side of the capsule in order to install the rigging, like I mentioned. That particular team member is highly experienced and highly trained. As you can imagine, climbing on top of an oddly shaped thing in the ocean could be a little tricky. So this person has undergone hours and hours of training and certification in order to perform this very important task. There on the right-hand side of your screen, we see the second fast boat approaching. Of course, both of these boats needed to wait for their cue from the water recovery lead in order to approach Dragon after splashdown. Again, that was just to make sure that there weren't any toxic vapors in the air. And now that they got the all clear, we do see them beginning to work on and around the Dragon capsule. So even though the camera's a little shaky, that water looks super, super duper smooth, almost like glass, which is certainly ideal for a water recovery like today.
Yeah, got to remember that this is a view from the main recovery vessel, which was still a few miles away from the splashdown
Dragon
point.
SpaceX. We have hypercrawl sweeps and unfired ordnance checks nominal. Rigger is on board the vehicle. About 5 minutes until capsule lift.
After that, yeah, we see them walking outside, and good news.
All right, confirmation there that all of those hypergolic vapor tests came out positive, or rather negative, which is a positive thing. So the team was able to approach, and now the crew member that is installing the rigging is on top of the capsule. It's difficult to see there because the slower vessel, the primary recovery ship, is a little further away. But as we heard, it's just a mere 2.5 minutes until they will be hoisted out of the water. I'm sorry, 25 minutes, not 2.5. I misheard that.
Yeah, they're fast, but they're not that fast. We also have been hearing that the secondary boat, which its primary mission in this case is securing those parachutes, they've already got buoys attached to both drogues, and 2 of the 4 mains and already had eyes on the other 2, so they're moving through that work pretty quickly. Again, their primary responsibility getting those parachutes together. The drogues detaching from the spacecraft right before the deployment of the mains automatically detaching immediately as Dragon detected splashdown. All of that happening right per the timeline.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about the hardwired buttons that Bob and Doug have on their seats and in their control displays, and cutting the main chutes is one of those buttons. In the event that they weren't automatically cut after splashdown, Bob and Doug would have had the ability to do so. If the winds were stronger and they caught the parachutes, it could certainly create a condition where the capsule could be moved unintentionally by those dragging parachutes. So definitely want to avoid that. So that's one of the few buttons that are hardwired into the cabin for the crew.
And again, right now we're expecting about 20 minutes for the main recovery vessel, the Go Navigator, to reach Dragon. By that point, all the rigging will be affixed, and then they'll be able to use the A-frame hydraulic lift on the back of the vessel to begin to pull Dragon up out of the water. Bob and Doug did report they're seeing the guys climbing around outside their window on the capsule, getting that rigging affixed. Still doing good from all of their reports. And we're just going to see the vessel continue to close in. It's a little over 1.3 nautical miles still away, but you can see things starting to sharpen up in our view as it does draw in closer.
One thing I didn't get to mention as the sequence events was happening, everything was going so quickly, just before the drogue deployment, the seats automatically rotated to about 26 degrees. And so if you think back to when we saw Bob and Doug while they were still on orbit and during the deorbit burn and all their departure burns, they were actually laying closer to on their backs at the 40-degree position, where essentially they were looking up at the top of Dragon capsule, like their stomachs were facing the top nose cone there. At this point, the seats would have rotated, so they're in a little bit more of an upright position. That's done to ensure that the loads experienced from landing are, doesn't hurt them. So at this point, they are not really laying on their backs in the ocean. They are seated upright a little bit, which would allow them to have a better view of the team working to install the rigging equipment. So at this point, we're at about 22 minutes until Dragon will be lifted onto the recovery vessel. Bob and Doug are still strapped into their seats, kind of like an airplane. They say, do not unbuckle your seatbelt until the captain determines that it's safe to do so. They will remain in their seats throughout the entire recovery process, essentially until it's time to get them out. Like I said, we are expecting to lift Dragon onto the Go Navigator recovery ship in about